news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, we talked to a longshoreman about the recent strike and a potential new strike and organizing the South. Canadian postal workers are on strike as well. We've got some Alabama education updates, all that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show, we've got a phone number. And the line, folks, the line is open. You can give us a call at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave us a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond to it on the next show. Just a reminder, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm. But we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, folks, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/the Valley Labor Report. We got a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. We have our logo dad cap, some of our Join a Union tees left, and pre-orders are open for union-made matchbooks and a new T-shirt that says "Unionize," but it looks like the Supreme logo. The Unionize T-shirt, I just placed the order. I just placed the order for that with our manufacturer last week, and I think right now I don't have a firm estimate on the delivery of that, but it's looking like sometime like late January. So that's when that looks like. But I think that we are going to have the matchbooks in before Christmas, so hoping to get a more firm estimate on that here soon. And finally, folks, if you're a member of a union, then think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just some diehard union brothers who want to amplify the voices of the working class here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener today, we appreciate you spending some time with us.
That's right. Last week was Thanksgiving, and I saw a really good tweet from Senator Bernie Sanders about Thanksgiving that I wanted to share with you. He said that this time of year, I'm always reminded of the Thanksgiving scene painted by one of my favorite artists, Norman Rockwell. Many people don't know this, but Rockwell actually lived for a time in Arlington, Vermont, and painted some of his most well-known pieces there, including his Four Freedoms. He even used many of his Vermont neighbors as models and inspiration in his work. Rockwell's Four Freedoms series was published in the Saturday Evening Post in 1943. They were paintings that reflected the vision that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt articulated in his 1941 State of the Union speech. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. In that speech, Roosevelt stated, quote, "In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and freedom of expression. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which, translated into world terms, means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world." That is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. That kind of world is the very antithesis of the so-called new order of tyranny which the dictators seek to create with the crash of a bomb. This is Bernie talking again. In my view, Roosevelt's vision from 1941 remains relevant today. On behalf of Jane, my children, and my grandkids, let me take the opportunity to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving and a wonderful holiday season. And the picture that he attached to the tweet was the freedom from want picture of a family at a Thanksgiving dinner with a big turkey. And it's really cool. Obviously, they look like they're having a lot of fun, and it's a reminder that the vision that folks like myself would like to see for the world is not antithetical to American history, but actually is rooted in American history and rooted in the most prosperous periods of American history. That being when FDR was president during the New Deal and the subsequent New Deal order, economically and politically. So that was really cool. Last week was Thanksgiving, so I wanted to share it with you. You should check it out, though. It's a really good painting from Norman Rockwell. With that out of the way, let's get to last week in Southern labor. So here's what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from November 22nd to the 29th. In new union campaigns, 32 workers for the Southwest Airline Pilots Association, SWAPA, at the union's headquarters in Dallas, Texas, filed a petition to hold their own union election with the SWAPA Staff Association. 90 workers at Hoganese in Gallatin, Tennessee, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Steelworkers, USW. 265 detention and transportation officers at Asset Protection and Security Services in El Paso, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 745. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 175 workers at Highline Warren in Glendale, West Virginia, demonstrated support for unionization with the Teamsters, Local 697. 55 workers at Breakthrough Beverage Group in Miramar, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 769. And workers likely pushed by their employer and with help from the National Right to Work Foundation filed a petition to decertify the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE Local 132, as the union representing 6 workers at Martin Marietta Materials in Institute, West Virginia. 3 workers at Rental Supply District 1 in Ashland, Missouri filed a petition to hold a union election with IUOE Local 513. And Amazon drivers at DGT 8 in Atlanta announced their unionization last week with a march on the boss. In election results, 23 workers at The Line in D.C. withdrew their petition for a union election with Unite Here Local 25. 18 workers at Starbucks in Baton Rouge, Louisiana voted unanimously in favor of unionization with Starbucks Workers United. 16 workers at Como Rocks in Columbia, Missouri withdrew their petition for a union election with the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 955. 24 workers at ProTech Fire Services in San Antonio, Texas voted unanimously in favor of unionization with the Kelly Airfield Professional Firefighters, Local I-107. 21 workers at Tractor Supply Company in Columbia, Tennessee voted 12-8 in favor of unionization with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, Local 1995. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, a National Labor Relations Board, NLRB judge, ruled that Exxon's nearly 2-year lockout of workers during contract negotiations from 21 to 22 was legal, agreeing with the company that the lockout was to pressure members of the United Steelworkers to accept a deal, which is legal, rather than attempting to oust the union, which is illegal, despite internal Exxon documents, which were reviewed by Reuters, but excluded from the NLRB's review, which showed that, at the very least, encouraging workers to decertify the union was a contemplated and welcome outcome of the lockout, rather than simple negotiating tactics. In strikes and bargaining updates, the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, IBB, announced that their members voted to ratify a new tentative agreement with BNSF, a railroad company, the latest in a string of individual contracts that rail carriers are making with rail unions, a departure from the previous round of bargaining, where there was at least a veneer of a united front from rail labor. The agreement provides for a 3.5% wage increase per year over the next 5 years. Service workers at Charlotte International Airport in North Carolina went on a 24-hour strike last week demanding higher wages and better working conditions. They currently make between $12 and $19 an hour, and they're asking for $25 an hour. More Perfect Union has a really good video out about the revolting letter carriers in the wake of a tentative agreement that many are saying is not enough. In political and legislative updates, the U.S. Postal Service is now arguing that the current make-whole remedies being pursued by the NLRB is unconstitutional. We love that. McKenna Schuler for the Orlando Weekly reports that experts anticipate Trump to roll back Biden administration attempts to protect workers from extreme heat. Railroad Workers United, a cross-craft caucus of union railroad workers, is expressing concern about Trump's nomination of Sean Duffy to head the Transportation Department. Duffy, they say, quote, consistently opposed measures beneficial to labor rights and worker protections during his tenure in Congress. His voting record includes opposition to increasing the federal minimum wage, enhancing workplace safety regulations, and expanding collective bargaining rights. His voting record includes opposition to those things. Duffy's alignment with corporate interests over worker welfare suggests a potential continuation of policies that may undermine the rights and well-being of rail workers. His lack of direct experience in transportation policy further exacerbates concerns about his ability to effectively address the complex challenges facing the rail industry. Trump has tapped Russ Vought to head the Office of Management and Budget, which manages a significant portion of the executive branch's responsibilities. Vought was an author of Project 2025, which is very surprising to me because Trump completely disavowed Project 2025, and I have a baby brain. On his way out the door of the Social Security Administration, Commissioner Martin O'Malley is touting significant improvement in customer service and employee morale at the agency, citing the following numbers, and all this despite the agency having its lowest staffing levels in 50 years. Average wait times on the agency's 1-800 number fell from more than 40 minutes last November to 12.8 minutes last month. The ratio of people receiving retirement, survivor of, or Medicare benefits within 2 weeks of applying hit a 4-year high. The time that it takes to receive a disability hearing has fallen from 368 days last November to 280 days last month. And they saw a 50% increase in employee survey participation and a 3-point increase in its employee engagement index. If we missed anything, let us know. You can do that at our website, tvlr.fm/contact. Let us know about your union updates. We'll be right back, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to Leonard Riley from the International Longshoremen's Association and the Southern Workers Assembly about the ILA's contract negotiations and organizing the South. Stay tuned.
Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Cure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Cure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Oh, okay. Why are...
Hey, y'all.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We're just having a little bit of technical issues,
Sorry
but
about
no
that.
worries.
And we've got, I don't know why.
It's all good. We'll pick it up.
Pick
it up from the top from the break.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. And we've got one segment before we bring Leonard on, so we want to hold on bringing him on for just a second. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Sorry. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That phone number is 844-899-8857. Really looking forward to the second half of the program, where we're going to be talking to Rob Derian about the Postal strike of 1970. It's going to be a really good conversation, and lessons learned for potentially some lessons learned for postal workers today as they are trying to fight for better wages and working conditions. We have Leonard Riley on the line now. Going to get to this story from Canada really quick. The Canadian government is trying to break a strike again. At least that's what it looked like. It started with the government stopping a strike of rail workers some months back, and then a couple of weeks ago, a strike of longshore workers. Now, the government is laying off some of the 55,000 postal workers, members of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, CUPW, as they round out their second week on strike. Neither the Canada Post, what they call their post office, nor the union is saying at this point how many workers are affected, though Canada Post is saying the layoffs are, quote, limited. The union is saying that the calls that Canada Post is making to members, informing them that they have been laid off, are only intimidation tactics meant to coerce members to abandon the strike. CUPW says that the layoffs are not legal and members have nothing to worry about. While this intimidation tactic from the government corporation is less heavy-handed than the back-to-work orders given to the other workers, business interests are calling for such orders to be issued. At this time, though, Canadian Labour Minister McKinnon is saying that back-to-work orders and arbitration is, quote, not in the cards right now, though he did not rule out the possibility in the future. He also says the parties are too far apart for mediation to work. Meanwhile, the United States Postal Service has said they will begin to pause international mail to Canada until further notice. Workers at the Canada Post decided to strike because the company hasn't come close to meeting their needs in this current round of negotiations, despite the fact that workers agreed to a 2-year contract extension in 2021 due to COVID to help the country. For the better part of a year, they've been working under an expired agreement to try to give the Canada Post more time to make a deal. Like many workers, they've dealt with declining wages and working conditions. In particular, starting wages have only increased 6.7% since 2006, meaning their purchasing power has fallen by 50% in the same time frame. Despite this, CUPW has not asked for a 100% raise immediately, which is how much it would cost to reach their 2006 pay levels, but 22% over 4 years. An eminently reasonable demand, and instead of being thankful for their modesty in giving them everything that they're asking for, Canada Post came to the table with a laundry list of further concessions that the corporation is demanding the workers take. Concessions like new hires don't get benefits for a full year, new hires not getting worse benefits than what current employees get, and new hires not being eligible for the pension. In addition, rather than a 22% raise over 4 years, the Canada Post is offering an 11% raise over 4 years. They're also asking for less leave. The corporation also wants to expand a 7-day delivery, which the union is not necessarily opposed to, but wants to ensure that their members do not become part of the gig economy and that full-time work is protected. Canada Post is claiming that they need these concessions to stay competitive, pointing to a $3 billion Canadian loss since 2018. But workers say that number is dubious in the first place because they're counting investments as losses, and secondly, that there are things the corporation can do to remain more competitive without further deteriorating the quality of the job, like expanding services, particularly offering postal banking. The Palestinian Postal Service Workers Union last week during the strike sent a letter of support saying, on behalf of Palestinian postal workers, members of the Palestinian Postal Service Workers Union across occupied Palestine, we stand in solidarity with you and your members across Canada as you near the end of your first full week of strike at the Canada Post. We send you this message from under a rubble of our homes destroyed by the Israeli apartheid war machine. It is a message written with the blood of martyrs and the tears of grieving mothers. It is a message of true solidarity from your siblings and comrades in occupied Palestine. This because the CUPW has been particularly vociferous in their support of Palestinian workers during the onslaught from Israel. So with that international update out of the way, wanted to bring on now Leonard Riley. Leonard Riley has been a union member for the better part of 50 years. He serves as a trustee of the International Longshore Association, Local 1422, and he is on the Southern Workers Assembly Coordinating Committee. Brother, thank you for taking the time to us. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Well, I definitely welcome the opportunity, and thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. Really excited to talk to you about this. And I know that you are, we're having you on to talk about the Southern Workers Assembly. Y'all have some really exciting work going on. But since you are in the Longshore Association, I'd love to talk to you about the strike and its aftermath and particularly the most recent news about the ILA pausing negotiations as management continues to not move on some of the really important objectives for the union. So just starting with the strike, can you remind folks why you were at odds with the ocean carriers and why it was important that the ILA go out on strike?
Yes, I'll give it a pull. Again, I'd have to remind people our contracts used to run 3 years at a time. We've now graduated to 6-year contracts. And in the last 6 years, we've fallen behind in supportive kind of wage structure and benefits. So, of course, one of our big pushes this time was to catch up with wages and benefits as we move forward in this lucrative business. We've lived up to our deals. We told management that if they address our concerns on automation, that we'll give them the work. We'll make up the numbers they need to be productive. And since that contract 6 years ago, they've been very, very productive. Thanks to our labor, they've made a lot of money, which is the goal, we know. Our goal is to share in some of that profit. As far as our membership is concerned, we want them to be able to live, respectively in this environment. And so as we started to talk this time, we wanted to be assured that we got the opportunity to improve our benefits, improve our wages, just as they've improved their profit margins. And so negotiations are going along fine, in my opinion. And we were working on some things that would be transformative to our people and people to come. However, after the election, I should say, and I think this is an important contributor, they started to stag on the automation piece. And we believe that we can have all the jobs in the world, but if they're automated, they're not benefiting the workers as well as they should be. So we have reached an agreement on the automation piece. We told them that we would outproduce currently what they're receiving from automated workforces around the globe. And we agreed to a number. And those numbers, we at the Union side was successful in living up to everything we promised and bargaining. And for those reasons, we are pretty upset that they're now starting to change course. We went on strike, and supposedly we reached terms that we can live with. But now that after the election, there seems to be some backtracking, and they're sort of digging in on the automation piece. And that's, I may as well call it straight. We want jobs. We want to make them productive. But we are not going to assist in eliminating ourselves.
Right. And I want to talk to you some more about the automation piece and the role that you think potentially the results of the election are playing in the ocean carriers and how they are negotiating with you. But staying on the strike, what did you make of all the vitriol that came at at the Longshoremen's Union during the strike and in part in its aftermath, as folks, really from sectors of both sides of the political spectrum. There are people that were saying that y'all were not being loyal to Biden, and then there were, the conservative business types that were saying that, you make too much money. Like, how did you and your members take those kinds of those kinds of reactions from people who have obviously, never worked the kinds of jobs that you do?
We say focus on our mission here because people don't understand almost everything they put on their backs, they use in their homes, they use around them, are shipped in, and we get to test those things. We a vital part of helping this country enjoy all the things that we enjoy. And we take that seriously. We are committed to doing our part. For those people that think we make too much money, they have to have experienced the things, the danger that's ever present on our jobs, and the loss of lives that have occurred very often on our job. So we are focused on that. We know the role that we play. We love for the country and all the people to understand that we're not trying to get rich off of what we do. We want to be able to live just like every other American live, and be the beneficiary of those things. We have to we have to feed our family. We have to send our kids to school just like everybody else does.
Right.
To prepare them for the future. And so for people to assume that we make a lot of money, compared to what? Compared to who? We are advocates.
Not compared to your bosses.
Not compared to them at all. But, we realize a contract is a contract. When we say to them at the table, look, if you live up to your part of the contract, we are definitely going to live up to ours. And so our whole mission, once we achieve our contract that's agreeable, we go to work. We tell our people we got to deliver if we're going to continue to reap the benefits.
And so you mentioned that y'all came to, you came to an agreement about wages, and that was a 62% pay increase over the next 6 years. It's important to have that tag on it. It's not 62% immediately; it's 62% over the next 6 years. And it's also worth noting that I don't even think that quite gets you to parity with the West Coast longshoremen. We've been talking about pensions lately as kind of a theme on the program, and there are even a couple of ports on the East Coast that don't have pensions. I think Houston and Philadelphia, I think, are the ones that I saw that do not have pensions, and then some of the other pensions that do exist at some of the other ports are not as generous as on the West Coast. So really, the ocean carriers are getting a really good deal, frankly, and they should be grateful to y'all for doing what you do. But you got kind of a tentative agreement on the wages, and so you agreed to go back to work until January while you hammered out the automation language. And we've been talking about recently that the carriers have kind of dug in on the automation stuff, and that ILA has paused negotiations, basically saying that right now management is not negotiating in good faith. And you've mentioned the election a couple of times. Do you think that the results of the election maybe have emboldened the employers to take a stronger negotiating position? And do you anticipate a strike come mid-January when this kind of contract extension expires?
Well, I can tell you this. I'm not looking forward to one, but if our demands aren't met and they are resolved not to move anymore, there will be a strike. And like you said, the perception of us doing so good is skewed, and people really have to do a little better research. yeah, I think the attitude we got more entrenched after the election. But when you look at the election, it's favoring big businesses, it's favoring not everyday people like you and I, and they are sort of encouraged about that approach. But I'm here to tell you, we are just as dug in on delivering to the working class all that they deserve to keep this economy moving. And we're not going to go to sleep on that issue. We're going to stand and fight for it. So I think they understand, because tentatively, early on, they agreed to the two major things: that we would deal with this wage gap that we've been experiencing, and then that we would deal with the automation piece. We dealt with last contract effectively. We delivered what they said the robots were delivering and more. And of course, they made more money. So we're saying now that we've lived up to it, and we plan to live up to this next contract. But they're more entrenched in their position, and I got to say, so are we. We plan to go back to work and get things done. All that's predicated on a decent agreement that, like the last time, we more than delivered, and I think we're looking forward to the same kind of cooperation from them.
All right. Well, appreciate that update on the Longshore situation, brother. So, like I said, we got you on to talk about the Southern Workers Assembly. Give us a summary of what is the Southern Workers Assembly. What are y'all trying to do with that organization, and who are members of the Southern Workers Assembly?
Wow. The Southern Workers Assembly was one of the best things that evolved since the union movement itself, in my opinion. We have this largest South that's not been organized nearly enough, and we are a group of trade unionists, everyday working people coming together, trying to find some order in which they proceed in their career, trying to find some promise at the end of a hard day's work or hard career's work, to have a decent retirement. These benefits mean the world and all. Work and earn enough wages to take care of your family and to educate them and everything else they need. And when you retire from that job, you should have a decent benefit. And you mentioned that we have a deficit between us and the West Coast, but the Southern Workers Assembly is formed to enhance that kind of organization, if you would, and purpose of our labor to receive those things. And we got union workers, we got association, we got workers, period. And all the voices are valuable in this assembly to help us do better as workers. So it's been a very rewarding to see workers coming together, even where no unions exist, to have a conversation with management. And for them to have a voice is very important. They can sit down and have conversation. And a lot of places it's still not possible. So we have to plan strategically how to make that available. But in some of the places, look at North Carolina, fiercely anti-union state. They don't give much of an opportunity for voice from the workers. But now, in the city of Charlotte, and sanitation workers and bus drivers and public bus drivers and all of these people now have voices at work. And they maybe not as formal as we would like it to get, but they have voices. They've fought for and received wage increases, benefits increases. But we have our eyes on our largest South. Management does, they're moving to the South in rapid pace, and they're moving there to take advantage of savings they see, because the people are less organized. Our mission is just the opposite of that. Help to organize people so they can demand a decent living. This is not a third world country. This country leads the world in so many areas, but we refuse to lead them in the way we treat workers. So the Southern Workers Assembly basically is a collaborative seeking to improve that dynamic, have workers sit down and have a conversation about who's representing them. The company has lawyers, board of trustees, and you could go down a list of representatives for the company. But who represents the worker? When workers get ended to the point that they can no longer work, who helps take care of them? So all these, that's the kind of organization we see ourselves. And they sum it up and say, organize the South. Absolutely, but there's so much to do. In my hometown, Charleston, South Carolina, we see ourselves, the ILA in Charleston, South Carolina, we see ourselves as the upper echelon of workers, because we have the right to sit down and bargain. We have the right to discuss safety on the job, and all of this. Is the lack of that across the South is still astounding, and we cannot settle for that. We, as workers, have to find a way to talk to one another, a forum that they can come and express some concern, and then we can evolve together as a workplace, a giant workplace in the South that has improving benefits, such as the management improves its profit margin. So we are, it's not a loose gathering, but we welcome all workers. We are a place where you can have a voice. You can talk about your discontents. You can talk about your dream for the future of your job and everything. So that's what we are. And we are constantly strategizing and planning and moving into areas that don't even have the semblance of an organized workforce. We want to impact people's thinking on the way this dynamic plays out.
And the Southern Workers Assembly has local bodies in several different cities across the South, so you can find them at southernworker.org is the website. What if you had one success story that you would want to highlight from the work that the Southern Workers Assembly has been doing over the years? What would that be? What's the one that you're most proud of, you feel like?
Well, I am extremely proud of the work that's being done in North Carolina, where they've come from no semblance of worker representation to where they are presently. And the capacity of those workers, to reach other places in North Carolina that don't have them, and across the South. So that's been that's been a model of what the Southern Workers Assembly needs to be doing as we take this South Carolina and Georgia and Alabama. I mean, we've been a part of meetings all across the South now, and it's only going to increase. Our numbers are growing, our capacity to do what we do is still growing, but I am excited just as when I started this movement that we are making a difference. Even going north into Virginia, we have some places that now they're winning victories at city hall at council meetings, and the idea of workers asserting themselves in a quest for a better way of life, better work conditions and better retirement, better time, better to spend time with your family, with whom you work for. If we don't spend time with our families, the streets are going to raise them. Then you got more problems. So you have to be able to work and have conditions where you can spend some time to go home and tell your children, this is why daddy's working, and to give you a shot at a brighter future. And, we're not being greedy by no scratch of the imagination. It's justice, economic justice.
And so, Brother Leonard, as we are rounding out, I wanted to talk to you about this recent program that I've seen from the Southern Workers Assembly about encouraging people to, get a job in a strategic industry and what looks like support from the Southern Workers Assembly to organize a union. Talk to us about that program and the support that the Southern Workers Assembly will be giving to these workers.
Well, we definitely sort of big on this. It's new to the program of the Southern Workers Assembly, but we're very hopeful that it will be effective. We want to start preparing workers before they even enter the workspace, adjust their expectation, what they're going to meet when they go into a workplace, and what they can actually do to help transform that workplace into a better situation for everyone. We talked about it's called salting. Management have a very deliberate, a very tested way of introducing themselves to the community. And most of the time they get support from the community just to bring the business there. So we want to reach workers that's contemplating going into the workplace, and we want to adjust their expectation. What's possible? What kind of representation that workers deserve in their workplace? We want to talk about safety, of course. We want to talk about earnings, and we want to talk about retirement. The possibility is there upward mobility in some of these situations. We want the workplace to be just the example of people working hard to produce and being the beneficiary of some of that production. So, we want people adjust their expectation, ask for certain things, know that you don't have to be denied safety to be effective in the workplace. We can create a safer workplace. Unfortunately, as the Port of Charleston grew, I've seen more death than I would like to in this workplace. And this is probably more extreme than a lot of workplaces, but it drove us to a faster pace to correct those safety issues, to correct the time that people can work on a job safely, instead of working 24 hours if needed. We have replacement workers to relieve that, because if you work exhausted, you're more likely to make errors. Some of them can be fatal errors. So they're important barriers we have to navigate in the workplace. We want to be productive. We want to produce so that they'll be willing to pay, and we can't rely on that all the time, because the more money they make, the more money they want to make. But we got to acknowledge the need to pay workers part of that benefit to keep them in a good place with an evolving community. If the worker makes robots don't pay taxes. I got to get that in. Robots don't pay taxes. Public service that we depend on our taxpayers. All of that, it has to be figured in the formula. if they pay you more, you pay more taxes, you get better schools, you get better hospital, everything you need, anything that public taxes pay for, we get those things. And the community as a whole, it starts to evolve on a different plane. Everybody gets the benefit from the hard work that's done to make management's profit. So, yeah, I needed to get that in because if you go into Walmart and all these other grocery stores, they're encouraging you to go to these machines and eliminating workers. So I never go to one unless push to go to one. And if I did go to one, I'm going to need some assistance operating it. So we're going to keep people working.
All right. All right.
That's what.
Leonard Riley, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. You guys doing a great job. Keep it up. Power to the people.
All right, brother. It's great having you on. Leonard Riley, union member for the better part of 50 years, trustee for the International Longshoremen's Association, Local 1422, and a member of the Southern Workers Assembly's Coordinating Committee. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back, give you some education updates, talk to you about how the fundraiser wrapped up, and more. We'll also take your calls. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857 if you'd like to call in. See you on the other side of the break.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Ironworkers Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need ironworkers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The biggest union talk radio program in the South. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-8857. That is 844-899-TVLR. Folks, I've been seeing a bunch of folks calling us again. I mean, and folks have continued to, like, independently of each other, calling us the Labor Valley Report. We are not broadcasting out of Labor Valley. We are broadcasting out of the Tennessee Valley doing a labor report. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hope so.
The Valley Labor Report. The labor report coming out of the Tennessee Valley. There you go. But yeah, so I've always found that funny. It's amazing how, like, independent of one another. Like, it's not like one person started it and then that's what... It's like people in all different parts of the country calling us the Labor Valley Report. But so it's fun. I enjoy it. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Again, that phone number is 844-899-TVLR. We got a really great overtime lined up for you. Going to be talking to a letter carrier at about 11:15 a.m. Central about the 1970 postal strike and what lessons, if any, there are to learn for postal workers today from that incident. So it's a pretty cool thing. Looking forward to that conversation. Wanted to give you a final update on our fundraising campaign. We did meet our goal. We ended the fundraiser just slightly under the $10,000 goal that we had set, but we ended up meeting it. We have exceeded it by $55 now at this point from the trickle of folks who have donated, so I appreciate that. In particular, want to appreciate everybody who has donated $75 or more. That is Anthony Beard, Mary Topi, Jared Leggett, Sydney Roberts, Jay Malone, Thomas Berryhill, David Can, Rick Job, Jacob Jones, Sol Osterkaz, Steve Early, Dave Smith, John Newsham, Kyle Kern, Tristan Gilbert, Kayla Sloan, Dustin Harrington, Adam Larson, a donation on behalf of the Birmingham DSA, Colin Randall, Zachary Can, Brian Kelly, Joseph Topi, Lance Ingwerson, Thurman Wenzel, Chris Langford, Julian Germain, Isaac Standridge, Nicholas Venn on behalf of the Labor Notes Alabama Troublemaker School, Reese Murtaugh, Haley Zarnick, Peter Comistra, Noel M., Maximilian Alvarez, Joanna Magner, Chris Doles, Connor Lewis, David Story, and Jessica Buttermore. Thank you very much to those 40 donors who donated $75 or more to the fundraising campaign. The link is tvlr.fm/union2024, tvlr.fm/union2024. We're going to be pulling down the donation page in the next week, but we will still allow donations to come in for the next week or so. and we'll still honor the gifts that you can get for donating. That is, if you donate at least $25, you'll get 2 matchbooks that say "Fire Your Boss," obviously union made. They're very cool. If you donate $150, you'll get those 2 TVLR matchbooks plus a free unionized T-shirt and a TVLR sticker. And if you donate $250 or more, you'll get all of the above plus our logo cap. So very cool. And if somebody were to drop a $5,000 donation and get us to our stretch goal of $15,000, I'm not anticipating that, but meeting our goal was sufficient. But if we were to do that, we will have a live show in the city with the largest numbers of individuals donating. Right now, Huntsville is winning, but each city does have less than like 20 donors, so it wouldn't be too difficult for another city to take the lead if you know a bunch of folks. So,
but I am going to make an audible. If someone does donate $5,000, I'd be down to go to your city.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we would go to your city if you donate $5,000. So there you go. Really appreciate everybody tuning in.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Everybody supporting the program. One person says in the chat, I will say when I first heard of your show, I was thinking of Valley, Alabama, not Huntsville. That's true. There is a Valley, Alabama, but yeah, we're broadcasting out of the Tennessee Valley. So that's the valley that we're talking about. But
that's right. We're on the air in Huntsville and the Shoals.
Yep.
So we hope to be expanding, and really appreciate everyone's support in this fundraiser. It was great to get your support. Sorry we had to spam your emails, but this is what we got to do to stay on the air. It does cost money to run this program, and we don't have billionaires and hedge fund investors and oligarchs who are backing this project. We just have everyday people, working folks, whether it's through our unions or just you individually chipping in a few bucks. So really do appreciate it. This is people-powered media, and we try to be, for the movement and about the movement, and really use our platform to boost organizing in the South. So that's why we talked to the Southern Workers Assembly this morning, for example. So that's why we do what we do, and couldn't do it without you. So thanks again to everyone who supported the fundraiser, even if all you did was share it and, like and send it around. That made a difference too.
Yeah. So, Adam, you got a request, a solidarity request from somebody who is, they're connected with somebody who is coming up for parole. This person is in prison right now in Alabama, and they have the opportunity of parole, and that hearing is coming up soon. And so there's his case is a particularly... a particularly easy case to sympathize with, and there were some folks requesting that we share his case on the air so that people know about it, so that people can support this person's parole. So, Adam, can you talk to us about this Mark Miller?
Yeah, so I learned of this gentleman who has a parole hearing on December 4th. But before I tell you about that, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background. Earlier this year, AL.com put out a really good series. It's called Denied: Alabama's Broken Parole System. And in this series, they examined the sharp decline in parole grants by the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles. And, if you're not familiar with it, parole provides incentives for incarcerated folks to participate in rehabilitative programs and avoid disciplinary issues in prison. And it allows for compassionate release for people who are seriously ill or elderly and pose no risk to public safety. Parole is also an important tool for addressing overcrowding, which is a significant factor contributing to the unconstitutional conditions in Alabama's prisons. The Parole Board's own guidelines suggest that more than 80% of incarcerated people should be granted parole, according to AO.com. But last year, Alabama's Parole Board granted just 8% of paroles, right? So they're saying 80% of folks should be granted parole, but only 8% are actually getting it. And this is in the context of a prison system that has been deemed unconstitutional by the federal government, in part due to massive overcrowding in both men and women's facilities. So back to Mr. Mark Miller. He is serving a life with the possibility of parole sentence under Alabama's Habitual Felony Offender Act. And that act has been subject to a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of pushes to change that bill, and you're going to find out why with his case. So he's been serving the sentence since 2003 and was ordered to pay restitution of about $9,870. Mr. Miller has served his sentence with good behavior and has fulfilled his restitution obligations. His case is an example of the harm caused by the scope of the Habitual Felony Offender Act. His case was escalated due to a previous personal use cannabis possession charge and a receiving stolen property charge that occurred several years prior. None of these were violent offenses that endangered the public in any way. They were Class C felonies. Modifications to the law should have allowed for a filing of a motion for modification of the sentence. In July of 2005, Mr. Miller filed a motion for modification of sentence, but the plea agreement offered by the state in his last offense included language that stripped Mr. Miller of his right to appeal post-conviction relief. Mr. Miller was first up for parole in 2006. He has job skills that will allow him to be a productive member of the free world and a home plan to support him during this transition. We believe Mr. Miller not only represents the unequitable application of the Habitual Felony Offender Act, but also embodies an individual who has taken all steps necessary to earn release. Mr. Miller has successfully maintained consistent employment throughout his incarceration. He has strong work skills in construction, which was his trade prior to incarceration, and in auto manufacturing, which were gained during his incarceration. He has worked outside of the facility for 8 to 10 hours a day with minimal supervision and demonstrated strong character in the workplace and at the facility. After release, Mr. Miller has a strong family support system that will make his transition from incarceration easier. He also has the support of folks like Jobs to Move America's workplace training that will offer him free classes in workplace readiness and financial literacy to reinforce a successful transition. So there's a lot you could dig into there, and maybe, some of the factors behind his case and so many others like him. But I wanted to share that with you. It was put on my radar recently. As I mentioned, Mark Miller's parole hearing is December 4th. If you are so interested, you can certainly write the board at notifications@paroles.alabama.gov. So that's notifications@paroles.alabama.gov. You can also write them a letter, though it is December 4th for the hearing, so I would urge you to send it electronically. So I really want to see some changes to that law. I want to see some really major changes to the mass incarceration in the state. But, knowing that this gentleman has his hearing coming up this week, really sending the best and wishing the parole board to do what they need to do and make a wise decision there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Really, wow. 20 years.
Already over 20 years. Yeah. It's a lot. That is a lot to handle. And, like I said, he's been working really hard, and, seems like the perfect example of someone who doesn't need to be locked up. So this let him transition and move on with his life. And, this all move on. I think that's what we got to do. And so, appreciate the folks who put that on my radar recently, and sending our solidarity.
Adam, we've also got a lot of education updates this week, both Alabama and nationally. Education is something that you keep a pretty close eye on, generally because of your background, former public high school history teacher, former staff for the teachers union in Alabama. So what's the latest on education?
Yeah, lots of headlines from public education recently that have come across my radar. The big national news, of course, is the naming of Linda McMahon as the future Secretary of Education. As I mentioned last week, I mostly know her from wrestling back in the day, but, we do know that President-elect Donald Trump has pledged to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education. A recent article from AL Reflector talks about how that would be a lot easier said than done. As Trump seeks to redefine U.S. education policy, the complex logistics, bipartisan congressional approval, and redirection of federal programs required make dismantling the department a challenging, though not impossible, feat. It's an effort that experts say is unlikely to gain traction in Congress, and if enacted, would create roadblocks for how Trump seeks to implement the rest of his wide-ranging education agenda. Education is decentralized in the United States, and the federal education department theoretically has no say in the curriculum of public schools. Much of the funding and oversight of schools occurs at the state and local levels. Still, the department has leverage through funding a variety of programs, such as for low-income school districts and special education, and of course, administering federal student aid. Axing the department would require those programs either be unwound or assigned to other federal agencies to administer. So that's something, a lot of educators are talking about and a lot of folks are paying attention to. We will see. I know there has already been legislation proposed in Congress that would formally abolish the department. But as this article pointed out, I tend to agree. I think it's going to be a lot harder for that to actually happen for a lot of reasons. So we'll see what happens there. But definitely some changes coming at the national level. At the state level, the Alabama Public School report cards came out, and of course, they make a big deal over those. And it's better that they showed mild improvement over the past year. Some mild improvement statewide. Obviously, it varied from school to school and district to district, but as a whole, the state did modestly improve. And obviously, that's better than not improving. But as someone who did spend a lot of time in the public education system, still have a lot of loved ones working in it, I believe they put way too much emphasis on these report cards and in particular on test scores. Some schools and districts obsess over this stuff to an unhealthy degree, I would say, and that's probably putting it mildly. Also, from AL.com, they had an article, Alabama K-12 enrollment is up, and it actually has reached an 8-year high, with pockets across the state seeing record growth in public school enrollment. Alabama is just one of 10 states that is projected to see enrollment increase through 2031. The state is preparing to start a dramatic expansion in school vouchers, though, which could encourage public school families to switch to private schools. Much of the recent growth comes from growing communities in the north, like Athens, Huntsville, and Limestone County, as well as pockets of South Alabama. And there's also virtual and charter schools, which added nearly 4,000 students this year. The other big news that I'm pretty familiar with happening in state politics when it comes to education is discussions around the school funding formula. I was at the Education Opportunity Summit, I believe a week or so ago, and that also made the news. It was in the Alabama Reflector. You can check it out. Education Group makes case for changing Alabama's school funding formula. Basically, the funding formula for Alabama schools is about 30 years old. And the way it works is that it is based on enrollment and attendance. So they just look at the school, how many kids do you have after a certain date that are in your school? All right, boom, we give you funding per pupil. And that's going to fund your teacher units, and that's defined by how many kids you have, all that kind of thing. And there's a lot of discussion right now about changing the way that formula works to actually account for the fact that some students cost more than others. And so what they're looking at doing is a weighted funding formula where they would actually chip in a little extra if it was low income, an English language learner, or special education, or students with disabilities. So that's something that's being discussed. It's being reviewed by the legislature. The legislative budget chairs have been talking about it and have set up a commission. So, this has got real traction. It's got real legs in the legislature. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this. Now, one of the big problems in Alabama schools, if you're talking about funding, is the lack of it, right? It's not being funded as well as schools in other states. Specifically, Alabama spends about $11,819 per pupil versus $15,633, which was the national average, and that's from 2022. So Alabama already does spend less per pupil in public education. What this formula change would not raise taxes, right? So they are just talking about the distribution of the education revenues that come into the state. And the lawmakers who have been discussing this in this joint legislative commission, they set a few guidelines. They said that the funding should align with student needs, that all districts see increased per pupil funding, that school systems receive more flexibility in allocating the funding they receive through the state's funding formula, and the systems retain control over local funding without money shifting from one district to another. So in practical terms, what this means is tapping into the reserve accounts of the Education Trust Fund if they're going to redistribute some of this in a different way, and no one takes a loss. And no one raises taxes, right? So, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion in the upcoming legislative session about this. So keep your eyes on that one. Another big education issue that keeps popping up is the libraries. Just recently, Amanda Jones, a school librarian and educator for more than 2 decades in Livingston Parish, Louisiana, faced harassment and threats after speaking out against censorship at a July 2022 meeting of her local library board. And as Jones tells it, she faced memes accusing her of wanting to give pornography and erotica to young children. The harassment continued for weeks until Jones had enough and decided to respond, first with a lawsuit, then with a book titled That Librarian: The Fight Against Book Banning in America, that details what she experienced for the more than 2 years after she first spoke out. Jones spoke Saturday at the New South Bookstore, an independent bookseller and former publishing company located in downtown Montgomery. And, of course, attempts to restrict book access have erupted in Alabama. In Prattville, a long-running battle over access to children's books led to the dismissal of the local librarian and a federal lawsuit. Libraries in Fairhope, Ozark, and Huntsville have also faced attempts at restriction. So, on the library front, the executive board of the Alabama Public Library Service recently held a meeting. They heard complaints from several parents about books they considered inappropriate for children, part of an ongoing public debate on how libraries should control access to books with sexual and LGBTQ themes. The Alabama legislature and APLS board has required local libraries to update their policies in what they say is an effort to protect young readers from sexually explicit material, or they risk losing their state funding if they do not change these policies. Also in a move supported by local library directors, the APLS board reversed an earlier decision and reinstated a federal grant program for local libraries. Thursday's meeting drew a standing room only crowd in the boardroom, and others watched remotely from an overflow room. So that's something that's kind of new. I imagine a few years ago, there weren't many standing room only meetings of the library board. But it's worth mentioning that the chair of the APLS board is John Wall, who is chairman of the Alabama Republican Party. He represents the 5th Congressional District on the Public Library Service Board, and he chaired his very first meeting that last Thursday. And besides funding and fights over the libraries, we also are going to have fallout from the CHOOSE Act, which is that dramatic expansion of school vouchers I mentioned earlier, as well as bans on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and bans on teaching quote-unquote divisive concepts. There's also been more and more conversations around expansion of school meals, as well as paid parental leave for educators. PHIP, which is the state health insurance program for education employees. They are requesting an additional $130 million in funding from the legislature next session. And that's on top of using nearly $120 million from the Retiree Healthcare Trust. And they are citing rising cost of healthcare and a reduction in Medicare funding. So they are already sounding the alarm to members of the retirement system of Alabama that they will be requesting more funding. So, there's a lot going on. And with all this going on, educators, parents, and public school allies have plenty of reasons to get involved. If you're an employee, I would encourage you to be organizing in the workplace while building coalitions with the students, parents, and community. Get involved with your union while building power in your school or work site with your coworkers. And, if you're not even sure where to start, feel free to reach out to us or to any of the great folks and organizations that we talk to on this program. But be sure to talk to folks outside the classroom about the issues that are facing you and your students. Legislative advocacy before and during the upcoming session will also be important. As we know, anti-public school forces will be pressuring lawmakers. I know that Alabama Rise will be advocating for public education and could use your support if you're here in Alabama. And if you're not in Alabama, chances are lots of this sounded familiar because these struggles are happening across the country and beyond. You may want to check out resources like Network for Public Education, Rethinking Schools, and Public School Strong. Pay attention to your local school boards as well as your state legislators and the shenanigans in D.C. Those of us who believe in great public schools for all have to come together and fight for them. And speaking of opportunities to get involved, if you're an education employee or retiree in Alabama, have you considered running for the board of the retirement system? Candidates are being sought for 6 positions on the TRS Board of Control. The teacher number 1 spot held by Amanda Miller, teacher number 2 held by Ricky Whaley, support personnel number 1 held by Susan Lockridge, post-secondary held by Susan Williams Brown, higher education number 1 held by Will Walsh, and retired number 1 held by Peggy Mobley. The election will take place in January 2025. Elected members will begin their 3-year term of service on July 1st, 2025. Nomination packets are available at www.rsa-al.gov and must be returned to the Retirement Systems Office no later than 4 p.m. on December 2nd. So that's coming up really soon. But if you are an education employee or retiree in Alabama, you might want to think about it. Consider it. Also, another upcoming event is the AEA Delegate Assembly. That is happening, I believe, next week in Tuscaloosa. Lots of interesting issues up for discussion at the Assembly, so we will be looking forward to hearing how that goes. That's for sure. And the last story I had for y'all on the education front, I just have to recommend that you check this out on AO.com. It's called Unconstitutional Scheme. Alabama journalists, school officials sue over arrest. Basically, long story short, the school board non-renewed the superintendent. And this is down in Escambia County, down in South Alabama. So down in Escambia County, they got rid of the superintendent. And the superintendent had allies in law enforcement, including the local attorney general. And they actually went so far in retaliation to defend the superintendent, I guess. It's not really clear the motivations, but bottom line, according to the lawsuit, Escambia County District Attorney Stephen Billy, Sheriff Heath Jackson, and 4 sheriff's deputies violated the constitutional rights of the 4 plaintiffs during their separate arrests after the Escambia County School Board voted 4-3 to not renew McClung's contract. So you had journalists and school board members who were attacked by law enforcement in retaliation. And this lawsuit surfaces 7 months after the Alabama Attorney General's office dismissed all criminal charges against the journalists and school officials. But the article goes on to detail how, in one, these two school board members, one of whom is an older lady, actually had to get booked into jail, stripped down, change into jumpsuits, the whole 9 yards, in a pure retaliatory move from local law enforcement. It is just really a wild case, a wild story. Recommend y'all check that out. But that's all I have for education updates. I had to end on the crazy one, but unconstitutional scheme, Alabama journalist, school officials sue over arrest. Definitely check that one out.
Heading back to the first kind of crazy story, the Linda McMahon as Department of Education Secretary. Like you, I only know her from WWE. Has she done something in her post-WWE tenure besides continuing to be married to a man who has been credibly accused of, like, incredibly gross, like, what, sexual assault kind of stuff? I mean, has she...
Yes,
has she? Is there, like, what is the... I don't even understand the connection to Department of Ed. Has she done education stuff in the interim?
You know, I'm still trying to find that out. I know that she ran the Small Business Administration for Trump previously, but I am not exactly sure of her public education ties. You know, with Betsy DeVos, it was very obvious, right? Her whole family was one of the handful of families financing corporate education reform and privatization for many, many years. With McMahon, I'm not quite as sure that it's an obvious connection like that, but definitely going to be looking into it a little bit more. I'm curious.
All right. Well, there you go.
And if any listeners like have some insight there, definitely let us know.
Yeah. Give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. As we're wrapping up, I'll leave you with one of our Boss Watch stories. We have 3, so if you want to get all 3 of them, then you'll want to subscribe to the newsletter, tvlr.fm, and subscribe. But this one is pretty insane, and if you've got, like, children listening, you know, you might want to turn away for a second. But this one happened in Texas, where a federal jury awarded $2 million in punitive damages against SkyWest Airlines, a Utah-based airline, and $170,000 for emotional harm to Sarah Budd, a female parts clerk, to settle a sex discrimination lawsuit filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The federal agency announced last week the verdict is the largest jury trial ever obtained by the EEOC in the Northern District of Texas. According to the EEOC, multiple coworkers and at least one manager made extremely crude sexual comments to Budd, including the suggestion that she should make money via prostitution. Male coworkers also made suggestions or requests that Budd perform demeaning sex acts and made frequent jokes and remark about rape and rape victims, including the statement that women who report rape do so for attention. The jury agreed that Budd, herself a survivor of sexual assault, experienced physical illness and intense mental anguish as a result of her work environment. Budd reported the sexual harassment to her supervisor, who did nothing in response to her complaint. When Budd reported the sexual harassment to the Employee Relations Department, the Employee Relations Manager did not interview many employees identified as witness to and participants in the harassment or ask obvious follow-up questions. As a result, the investigation did not uncover the full extent of the harassment. Although SkyWest promised to discipline participating coworkers and provide department-wide training, the discipline was superficial and SkyWest canceled the training after Budd retired. After Budd, the victim, retired, saying that it was no longer necessary despite the fact that the offenders were still working there. SkyWest conducted training 3 years later and only in response to litigation. The EEOC filed suit after first attempting to reach a pre-litigation settlement, and the Dallas jury of 10 returned a unanimous verdict finding that SkyWest Airlines subjected Budd to a hostile work environment based on her sex, and that the company knew or should have known of the harassment and failed to take prompt remedial action. The jury did not find Budd had also been retaliated against when she was placed on indefinite administrative leave following her complaint, however. The monetary judgment was reduced to $300,000 based on Title VII's statutory caps applicable to compensatory and punitive damages. We're about to head into the second half of the program where the big thing is we're going to be talking about the 1970 U.S. Postal Service strike with a NALC Branch 2902 member. Also going to be talking about some other stuff. CFPB, people want to delete the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And Amazon organizing is taking off. If you want to call in, phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Thanks for tuning in. And if you don't hang out with us for the second half of the program, we'll see you next week. All right, folks, off the radio now. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. We're going to take a break, like I said, and then we're going to be right back with the second half of the program, so don't go anywhere.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My fellow agitator is Adam Keller. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Folks, if you're listening to us as a podcast, give us a 5-star rating. A 5-star rating would be super cool. And like the stream if you haven't, if you're listening online, if you are... And hey, if you're listening to us on the radio, then call the station and let them know that you appreciate them for running our program, that you think it's a valuable addition to their lineup. So figure out what your station's phone number is and give them a call and let them know you appreciate it. So let's see. We're going to be talking to Rob Derian about the postal strike here in just a moment. In 1970, the 1970 postal strike. Really excited for that conversation. Going to be talking a lot about this book by Philip Rubio, presumably not related to the senator. The title is called Undelivered: From the Great Postal Strike of 1970 to the Manufactured Crisis of the U.S. Postal Service. So looking forward to that conversation. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. Let's talk about this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau stuff. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a federal agency that came out of like the agitation from the financial crash of 2008 to protect consumers from seedy businesses and banks and stuff, right? And it's actually been very, very successful in its mission, having returned directly $20 billion for only $1 billion of funding. Right? So if you give me an agency, like it's just talking about in the context of government efficiency, right? If this is kind of the conversation that we're having now, if we want to talk about government efficiency, and I tell you that for every dollar that I give this agency, it returns $20 to people who have had that money stolen from them by corporate goons. That's not a bad investment. And you also tell me that the agency is run not by my taxes, but by fees taken from the goons who do the stealing and thievery. That's a pretty, it costs me nothing. It only costs bad people money, and it only costs them money if they get caught doing bad things, right? So, this is like a really cool thing here that we have in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But not everybody agrees with me. Let's take a look at this guy who is on the Joe Rogan podcast, Mark Andreessen. Mark Andreessen, I think he's a billionaire, multi-millionaire, venture capitalist guy who stands to make a lot of money if banks and financial tech companies are have less regulations. This guy directly has a lot of money to make. Let's see what he thinks about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on the largest corporate media podcast in the country. And I say corporate media because Joe Rogan is not, many people don't know this. They don't realize this. Joe Rogan is not independent. He does not, I think at a certain time he used to be, but he is not. His show is paid for by Spotify. Not by his listeners, not even by ad revenue that he gets as he generates more views. Spotify cuts him a check. He is, and Spotify is a corporation, so he is definitionally corporate media. Let's take a listen to Mark Andreessen's interview on corporate media podcast Joe Rogan.
So, for example, we have this thing called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB, which was it's sort of Elizabeth Warren's personal agency that she gets to control. And it's an independent agency that just gets to run and do whatever it wants, right? And if you read the Constitution, there is no such thing as an independent agency, and yet there it is.
What does her agency do?
Whatever she wants.
What does it do, though?
Basically, terrorize financial institutions, prevent fintech, prevent new competition, new startups that want to compete with the big banks.
Really?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
How so?
just by terrorizing anybody who tries to do anything new in financial services. And
Can you give me an example?
Well, I guess, debanking. This is where a lot of the debanking comes from, is these agencies. So debanking is when you as either a person or your company are literally kicked out of the banking system.
Like they did to Kanye.
Exactly, like they did to Kanye. My partner Ben's father has been debanked.
Really?
We had an employee who
for what?
For having the wrong politics, for saying unacceptable things. Under current banking regulations, here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off of to kick them out of your bank.
What?
You're not allowed to have them.
What if you're politically on the left?
Well, that's fine.
No,
because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Can you tell me what the person that you know did, what they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing. He's pro-Trump. I mean, he's said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked him. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. But, by the way, you can't
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So this is the thing. And then you go in this thing of like, well, this is where the government and the companies get intertwined. Back to your fascism point, which is there's a constitutional amendment that says the government can't restrict your speech, but there's no constitutional amendment that says the government can't debank you, right? And so if they can't do the one thing, they do the other thing, and then they don't have to debank you. They just have to put pressure on the private company banks to do it, and then the private company banks do it because they're expected to, but the government gets to say we didn't do it.
Wow, so that sounds pretty nefarious, and it would be pretty nefarious, potentially, if any of it were true. Especially as it relates to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is actually literally the opposite of true that the CFPB has been pressuring banks to debank conservatives. And this politically exposed person thing, that is a term from the banking industry for foreign political people, right? Foreign, like people in like designated terrorist groups and things like this. It's not a U.S. national, a term for U.S. nationals. It is a term for foreign operatives. But the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's director, Rohit Chopra, has been actually for years fighting against banks' abilities to debank folks based on religion and politics. It is exactly the opposite of what this guy is trying to make it seem. The banks, independent of the government, are in some cases, and it's typically for really radical and marginal kind of figures on the right, like people deep in white supremacist politics and things like this. But also I think there are some a little bit closer to mainstream conservative people that have, for one reason or another, according to the banks, been debanked. And Rohit Chopra has been fighting against that. Just a couple of weeks ago, the CFPB filed a reply in a case where the Chamber of Commerce, not the government, and the American Bankers Association, again, not the government, are arguing that they have the full and complete right to deny people banking services based on politics and religion, and that these allegations that people are being debanked because of their politics, cannot even be investigated. The CFPB replied, "That's not true. We disagree. You shouldn't be able to do this." Is the stance of the CFPB. A couple of months ago, Chopra actually spoke to the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society, the famous conservative right-wing legal institution, spoken to by the Biden administration's CFPB director, about the dangers intrinsic to this argument from private financial institutions that they have the ability to debank people because of their politics. Even back in 2022, Chopra was attacking PayPal for thinking that they had the authority to fine people for expressing legal political views. Even Breitbart has praised Chopra's work fighting for conservatives against debanking. So it's just totally the opposite, actually, of what this guy is talking about on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Are you telling me they don't always fact check everything
they
on
do
Joe
not.
Rogan?
Jamie must have been asleep during that segment, not fact-checking. And so it's worth understanding who this Mark Andreessen guy is. Like I said, he's a venture capitalist. He also serves on the board of Meta, Facebook, and Neom. Neom is the Saudi Arabian government's plan to build a megacity in the desert. So it is interesting here that he is just making stuff up about the CFPB because he is ostensibly outraged at what he would say are the injustices that he pretends are committed against, critics of the regime, right? You can imagine him saying such a thing. But he's perfectly comfortable literally working for the Saudi Arabian government where critics of the regime have literally been chopped up, right? I mean, that's just crazy. He is making up a false thing that is not happening so that he can feign outrage against the Biden administration for something that is being done for a government that he is working for to exponentially higher degrees, specifically the murdering of critics. In response to the overwhelming criticism of his lies on Joe Rogan, Andreessen pretended not to have known that this was happening and said that, oh, well, it's great if it is happening, that Chopra is fighting for conservatives. In a reply to a post laying out this information, though, the information that the CFPB has actually been fighting for conservatives and their right to, have a bank, Elon Musk said that the CFPB needs to be, quote, deleted. This is because, in my view, in addition to actually trying to protect conservatives from debanking, the CFPB is an effective protector of consumers. Like I said, having only used $1 billion, again, not from tax money, but from fees that they collect from people who do bad things and defraud consumers, it has returned $20 billion that was stolen from the American people by seedy corporations, and that is just what they directly took back for American consumers. It does not account for the money that would have been stolen, but for the fact that we have a cop on Wall Street, so to speak. The CFPB estimates that they are on track to save consumers $20 billion in junk fees, not over the course of the existence of the CFPB, every single year because of their new rules about them. $20 billion a year, not taken out of the pockets of consumers, because of the CFPB. And that is actually why these Mark Andreessen types and the literal richest man on the face of the earth, Elon Musk, cares about the CFPB and has expressed a desire to, quote, delete it. It's because it is a check on the power of people like Andreessen and Musk. Reporter Ryan Grimm said in a tweet that this is a test for MAGA types and the populist right to see whether they allow themselves to be lied to flagrantly by elites trying to manipulate them. The CFPB put out a legitimately good rule that went after banks over debanking users based on political views. Yes, a populist left-wing CFPB stood up for the rights of conservatives. Now, venture capitalists and Elon Musk, who don't like the CFPB for other reasons, are just straight up lying to people to whip them into a frenzy and defang the CFPB. The message is they think you are stupid and you can't read and you're going to make your life worse, and these people are going to make your life worse in order to enrich themselves. So there you go. That's the skinny on the CFPB and what's going on. Elon Musk wants to delete it because it protects people like you and people like me from people like him. There you go. That's the long and short of it. Do we have Rob in the Zoom now? We have Rob in the Zoom. Really excited for this conversation. Rob Dorakjian, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, is a member of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 2902. He is also a member of the coordinating committee for the Reform Caucus within the NALC, Build a Fighting NALC. Rob, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing great, brother. How are you?
Very, very good.
Good. It's good to have you on. Really appreciate it. And so, I guess the first thing before we start talking about the strike and the the strike in 1970 and maybe what lessons that we can learn from this, and particularly what lessons letter carriers can learn from this. Can you talk to us about your history in the union? What, how did you get a job at the Postal Service? What made you want to get a job at the Postal Service, and what made you want to be involved in the union?
Sure. So I've been a letter carrier since 2022 in August, and it's been about 2 years. I was inspired to get a job by my friend Tyler Vassar, who was working in Minneapolis at the time, and at the time it was just a job. I wasn't looking to transform the NALC at the time. I just wanted to work there, and quickly realized that I would have to get involved in this fight if I wanted to keep this career for myself.
Gotcha. That's a good reason to get in the fight. So I guess to lay the foundation for this conversation about the 1970 strike, which I've been reading about from a book that Tyler actually recommended. The book is called Undelivered: From the Great Postal Strike of 1970 to the Manufactured Crisis of the U.S. Postal Service. I regretfully have not been able to finish it before this interview, so you'll have to forgive my ignorance on some of the stuff. But why is it important to learn this history, generally speaking? Why should I, if I'm just a union member, in general, why should I care about this history? But particularly if I'm a letter carrier, why should I know about this strike that happened in 1970?
Well, to start off with, if you're a union member in this country, the postal strike of 1970 is one of the greatest moments, I think, in the entire labor movement in this country. You saw a group of hundreds of thousands of workers go on strike, topple not only their recalcitrant union leaders at the top, but also defeat Richard Nixon. At the time, very right wing, many parallels to our administration coming in today. It's the largest Wildcat strike in U.S. history. As a letter carrier, it's the most important strike in our union's history. It's the event that turned the NALC into a real union, a union with full collective bargaining rights, a union that had previously been at the mercy of Congress into a fighting democratic worker organization. It turned the letter carrier craft and postal worker crafts in general into a stable middle-class job, something that you could raise a family on. It is the defining event in postal union history, in my opinion.
And what would you say? Well, let's start with the strike. Let's get an overview of the strike then. What was the context for the 1970 strike? These things, the strikes never just happen. They don't just come out of nowhere, and particularly strikes that are at least technically illegal don't come out of nowhere, right? These things require a context to happen. They don't just fall out of coconut trees. Forgive the expression. So what was the context for the 1970 postal strike?
So we're looking at the late 60s leading into 1970. There was, rampant inflation, 4 or 5% a year. The Vietnam War was raging. There was an upsurge in feminist struggle, the second wave feminist movement. There were all kinds of social movements. There was obviously the civil rights and the Black Power movements going on. I think in 1970, there was something like 1/6 of union members had gone on strike. So there was a general atmosphere of combativity, of ordinary people fighting against exploitation, fighting against their oppression, organizing, coming together. And at the same time, letter carriers saw that their union wasn't fighting for them, that they weren't actually making progress. At the time, it's very important to keep in mind that the United States Postal Service didn't exist. We were working under the United States Post Office Department, a federal agency. Our boss was Congress. We had to rely on Congress to get any increases in wages and benefits. And as I'm sure everybody here can probably guess, we didn't get many many wage increases back then. Between 1925 and 1943, there were no wage increases at all. And so at the time of the strike, a letter carrier was making something like $6,170 per year. And after 21 years to reach top pay, they would make around $8,000, which translates roughly to between $50,000 adjusted for inflation and $68,000. The contract had no enforcement mechanisms. Management ran roughshod. Letter carriers worked in outdated buildings with no heating or air conditioning in most of the time. And many letter carriers were forced to go on welfare or work second or third jobs just to get by. And so there was a tremendous amount of built up anger and frustration, but with no way to address it because striking was illegal. But nevertheless, there was activity, there was movement. In the late 60s, in 1968, several of the postal unions at the time had rescinded the no strike clause from their constitutions. They had organized sick-outs in July of 1969. They'd organized marches in Washington, D.C. and outside post offices to demand a pay increase. And all of this activity went unnoticed by both the official national leaders of the union, the president, the Secretary of Labor. Postal workers were referred to in that time as the dependable men in gray, sort of invisible, people who would just take it, who just mail, keep quiet, etc. And lo and behold, in a few months, in March of 1970, they changed the world. They did something historic. They went out on strike. They struck against the federal government.
You know, when I read your article, you wrote an article about this. The title is "The Great Postal Strike of 1970: Lessons for Today." You can Google that title and it should come up. That stat that you just said, that the equivalent of the wages were starting at $50,000 a year and topped out at $68,000 a year. What really struck me was how much higher that starting wage is than it is today, and how, I mean, the starting wage today is something like $41,000 or $42,000 a year, and the idea that $50,000 a year could be a low enough starting wage to provoke such intense action, I think speaks to the raised expectations of workers in that era and the lowered expectations of workers in this era. I mean, if you were to take the current pay scale back 50 years, I think a lot of them would be appalled. I mean, the top out is higher. The top out is now like 84,000 or something, or 80,000. But it takes 15 years to get there, or 15 if you count the CCA. And so, but the starting wage being 20% lower approximately is just really astounding to me. What do you make of that? I mean, does that track with your understanding of the history, that people's expectations were just so much higher back then?
It does, but I think the expectations have to be understood in the context of not just the social environment, because we've also seen in this recent period a rise in strikes, a rise in figures like Sean Fain, not just striking, but then also speaking in the name of the working class as a whole, linking their struggle with all of the issues that we as working people face. And so I don't think it's just a question of sort of external factor, this social period. It's also a question of the leadership. And I think, unfortunately, in our union, and unfortunately in many other unions, although there are important exceptions, the past couple years, the past few decades have seen an acceptance of these lower expectations. Business unionism. We have to, the post office is losing $6 billion. Well, then what can we do? We have to make these concessions. We have to give up this money. Now, thankfully, that is starting to change. But I think that, when workers see that their union leaders are telling them, this is the best we can do, keep your head down, we can't fight, don't bother fighting, a lot of them, unfortunately, they get the message and they keep their heads down. And part of the reason why I'm involved in Build a Fighting NALC, the fundamental thing is to get people from looking at their feet to looking around at their other coworkers, to raise their confidence, to encourage them to fight. We're talking about the strike, but this applies to everything. The union is only as strong as it's felt. The union is not just a contract, a leadership structure, bylaws. Those things are necessary. The essence is the solidarity. The essence is the sense that we are together. If there's an issue that affects one of us, we're going to tackle it as a group, in a station, in a region, as a union of 300,000, whatever the scale might be. And so to answer your question shortly, I think, yes, unfortunately, that has been the case. But we are now engaged in a fight, not just in our union, but in unions across the country, in raising those expectations again. And I hope to be a part of that.
Part of the, there is one fellow in the chat that has been, today pretty regularly kind of deriding people who are voting no. And something that he said that surprised me was that he said that this fellow, it claims to have been in the union for 40 years and met Vincent Sombrado at a 1990 NALC convention and said that Sombrado was the best president the NALC has ever had. And now, so what do you make of that dissonance of being like enamored with this guy who was part of kind of the informal strike leadership and was elevated after a certain amount of time to the national leadership of the union, by going on an illegal strike, and yet the same guy with this fact in his mind, or this opinion in his mind, is also saying we should vote yes on the tentative agreement. It's good enough. What do you make of that before we jump into this? Because when he said that, I was like, well, that's crazy. That is super not consistent.
Sure. So what I would say to that union brother or sister or whoever is that I understand why you look at Vincent Sombrado and you compare him to Brian Renfro and you think, well, geez, I don't know. We don't have a fighter like Sombrado in office. Maybe this is the best we can get. And what I would say to you is to put your trust in movements like Build a Fighting NALC, the Concerned Letter Carriers. There are lots of people who are willing to fight. And as we've seen, our contract is gaining a lot of attention amongst our coworkers, amongst the public. And if we want a Sombrado figure to take over the union in the future, if we want to return, we have to fight now. So I would say, and that fight consists principally right now in voting no. But I certainly understand comparing Sombrado to Renfro is, that's no contest.
And so back to 1970, we talked about the context, but typically there's like a trigger. You can. It's important to kind of have the dry field that's ready for a fire, but you have to have something to trigger it. What was the thing that finally got workers in contravention of U.S. law, in defiance of their national union leadership, to go out on strike? What was the inciting event?
So the strike was started in New York City among carriers in Branch 36. That was where Vincent Sombrado was working as a letter carrier. In the lead up to the strike, I mentioned this just previously. In July 1969, and Sombrado references as a dress rehearsal for the strike, there were letter carriers, but also mail handlers in what was then the Manhattan Bronx Postal Union, who were tired of waiting. They had voted their convention. If we're not getting a contract by July 1st, we're going to sick out. Something like 60 of them did. And postal management came down on them really hard, said, we don't want to pay them. We want to fire them. And the leadership at the time, both of the letter carriers and MBPU, kind of dragged their feet, kind of like, we're not gonna defend these guys. And so a rank and file grouping cohered, which said, no, we're going to defend these people. They are our people. We're going to get their jobs back. We're going to get them back pay. And seems like a small issue, 60 carriers, not that much. But in Sombrado's own testimony, he said that was the dress rehearsal. That was when we came together. And other material from the time suggests that in the summer of 69, so before March of 1970, this grouping of rank and file letter carriers in Branch 36, but also in the Manhattan Bronx Postal Union, they started to meet. They started to come together. They were part of softball leagues, bowling leagues. There was a much greater sense of social cohesion. They knew each other. They spoke to each other, and they agreed, we have to strike. We cannot just rely on Congress anymore. We have to risk it. We have to go forward. We have to push our union. And in the meetings, the general membership meetings, which happen in every union, leading up to March 1970, you see them get bigger and bigger, from 20 people to 50 to hundreds, really battering down the wall set up by the existing union leadership insisting we need to discuss striking, we need to do this, we need to do this. And that pressure built up and built up and built up. And then they learned the news that in his federal report, President Nixon at the time said, the 5% wage increase that I promised, I'm going to freeze that. And also their union president, the national president, James Rademacher, they learned that he had been in secret negotiations to couple a raise, I think it was like 5.4%, with postal corporatization, which would rescind the protection of being a federal civil service employee. And when those two things happened in my mind, it set off the powder keg. And then, fast forward to March. I think the strike started on the March 18th. A couple days before that, they packed their union hall. They voted something like 1,500 to 1,000 were going on strike. Their local president, Gus Johnson at the time, was insistent that they not do that. But by then, the tide had overflowed. And both clerks, basically mail handlers, and letter carriers came together. This was not just a strike by letter carriers. It was a strike by all postal workers. And that was essential to the strike's success. But it originated in New York City and then just spread like wildfire across the country.
And so how did, as workers, rank and file workers, decided to, take this into their own hands and strike in defiance of the law and their union leaders, how did the government and their union leaders react? So,
as you might be surprised to know, in the first couple of days of the strike, Nixon apparently didn't pay any attention. The Vietnam War was going on, but I think more so there was the sense that, well, this thing can't actually spread. The Postal Department had actually provided a contingency plan to bring in the National Guard before Nixon did. And their whole assumption was, well, we know these rabble-rousers in New York City, if they go on strike, we'll send the troops in, we'll crush it, nobody else will follow them. That was their biggest mistake. The union leaders, for their part, Rademacher was terrified because he had lost control of the union temporarily. He quickly began calling for branch presidents across the country to come to D.C., where the headquarters was, to insist that they urge their members to go back to work. Now, again, the strike is illegal, but I think it's important to also point out the consequences for striking. You could receive a $1,000 fine. You could go to jail. It wasn't just about, obviously you could lose your job, but there were high stakes, and there was tremendous pressure after a few days, tremendous pressure brought to bear on Rademacher to get people back to work. But by then, the momentum, the solidarity, the power, and the determination of letter carriers meant that essentially Branch 36 replaced Rademacher and the national apparatus as the real leaders of the union in the eyes of most letter carriers and most postal workers. So eventually Nixon does bring in the troops. That is a farcical flop. They are unable to move the mail. Many strikers were National Guard or veterans themselves, but they were totally unprepared. And when the strike spread, particularly to very important logistical nodes like Chicago, Los Angeles, by the way, there are hundreds of cities and towns across the country where people went on strike. Towns of a couple hundred people. 671 post offices went on strike. So while emphasizing these nodes, it's important to also say this was a truly national strike. And many people, or many postal workers, didn't vote. They just instinctively stood with their brothers and sisters in New York City. I remember when I was writing this, I came across a story of an oral history of how the debate in the local union hall went in, I believe it was like New Haven, Connecticut, or somewhere around there. And this letter carrier at the time is referencing all the debates, the reasons for and against. And at one point in the meeting, it's running long. It's been hours and hours. One guy just gets up and says, look, are we with our brothers and sisters in New York or not? And that that was the fundamental question. Are we with our brothers and sisters in this union or not? And fortunately, many letter carriers answered yes and risked quite a bit to ensure that the strike spread and therefore succeeded.
Up to eventually approximately 200,000 postal workers went out on strike, according to Rubio in his book, at least. I think the Postal Service has an estimate of 150,000, and then I think Sombrado was the person with the more generous estimate. I think that he had like an estimate of 220 or 230. I think Rubio kind of comes down in the middle, thinks it was something more like 200,000. But any of those three is a really impressive number of people to have gone out on strike against one institution that it was illegal to go on strike against. I mean, really impressive display of solidarity there. And you mentioned the National Guards not being able to move the mail. I was struck by Rubio's recounting of public sentiment and how polls showed something like 8 in 10 Americans supporting the strike. Very similar numbers to what you saw during the UPS contract negotiations and the UAW contract negotiations. And there was at least a couple of testimonies of National Guardsmen expressing solidarity, like as they're being bussed in, hollering out the bus, like, "Don't worry, we're not doing any good in there." And at least a couple of instances of what seemed to be sabotage on the part of the National Guard, like purposely not doing a good job because they did not enjoy, being called on to break a strike. When you join the National Guard, people typically have this idea of like, I am going to guard the nation, right? I am going to be a protector of my country and my people and my neighbors, not I am going to be used as a weapon of the boss to undercut my neighbors. Like that's typically, that's just not what people get into the Guard for, right? And so I thought that was interesting. What did you make of like the public's reaction and some of those collections of responses from the National Guard themselves?
Sure. So I think then as now, the public supported letter carriers and postal workers because they interact with them every day. We deliver people's medicine. We deliver their Social Security checks. For elderly people, we might be the only people they see every day. And we're out there, raining, blizzard, heat, whatever. We're going to get to your door. We're going to talk to you. We create a sense of community with people. And I think also at the time as well, those inflation numbers, and the fact that many of the postal workers had served in the Vietnam War. I think it was something like a fourth of letter carriers across the country were, recently in the armed services. People understood that the letter carriers were, not just at their doors, but also, were suffering the same kinds of economic hardship that they were. Very similar to today. If I talk to anybody about inflation, they get it. If they're working class, if they're working, they understand. I don't have to go into the details of the contract to say 1.3%. Their eyes get wide. So I think, broadly, there was a broadly shared experience amongst working people in this country that helped build a sense of solidarity. And then with the stories about the federal workers trying to move the mail and the sabotage, again, just speaks to the fundamental solidarity between working people that, in my opinion, always exists. Is not always given the full expression and organization that it deserves, but it's always there. These National Guardsmen, this was a time, by the way, in the late 60s, 70s, when the U.S. military would encourage coup d'etats in many countries across the world. In South America, one strike veteran in the book by Rubio recounts how, when he was on the picket lines in New York City, he was telling his coworkers, like, I remember this is the kind of stuff we see going on in the South American countries, and it's here in New York City. And I think those National Guardsmen also had that consciousness. They also had that awareness. They didn't want to be used by Nixon in this way fundamentally. And there Nixon overplayed his hand. And so all of these, these tools of the state machine, the National Guard, the Army, et cetera, seem very imposing. But at the end of the day, most of those people, then as now, are just like us. They're working people. They're
Mhm.
struggling to survive. And
Right.
if you can connect with them on that basis, which the strikers did in 1970, you can overcome a seemingly unstoppable foe like the U.S. military by undermining it from within. And I think that's very important today. We're not facing the U.S. military right now. Thankfully, they're not trying to break or move the mail. But that solidarity, that is our most powerful weapon as working class people. But yeah, no, the stories of the book, and I really encourage people, please read the book. There's really great stuff in there related to that and other sort of anecdotal stuff that really gets across the spirit that carried the strike.
Right, right. And so how did the strike end, and what did they win from the strike, and did they lose anything?
Sure. So the strike starts on Wednesday, March 18th. It spreads in a very uneven character. The union is basically at the mercy of the rank and file. By the weekend, so that's a Tuesday, by the weekend, Rademacher had announced a deal. He had announced that we've got a deal with George Shultz, the labor secretary. We got it all sorted out. Just go back to work. And many people, many strikers, like in New York and other places, said, no, we're not going to just trust your word on it. But then, some people did, and or some cities, some regions did. And so you saw an uneven process of people slowly but surely across the country going back to work. Rademacher promised that, if the strike lasted one more week, he would lead a strike himself. I don't think I buy that, but many postal workers at the time were willing to give him a chance, and it's understandable. He was the union president at the time. And so by, I think it was March 26th or 27th, so it was 9 days, the strike formally ends. Everybody goes back to work. There was the agreement was a 12% wage increase, the right to collectively bargain, which was key because you didn't have that right, full paid health benefits, and amnesty for all the people who went on strike. So not a single letter carrier was fired. Nobody faced fines. Nobody faced jail time. And that was, again, because of the solidarity. Mass collective action is what protects us the most, not the law, not appealing to managers, but demonstrating in action that we are willing to stand up with our brothers and sisters. Eventually, that package was ratified in the Postal Reorganization Act. So an act of Congress had to be passed. It took about a year. But they gained 14% wage increases, the right to collectively bargain. The Post Office Department was transformed into the Postal Service. And the key concession was the right to strike. And so instead, we got interest binding arbitration, which is what we have now, which is when negotiations break down, a series of arbitrators, one for the union, one for management, one neutral, come together and decide the details of the contract. And that is, unfortunately, I think, a concession that has haunted our union to this day.
Right, right. Yes, not having the right to strike, severely undermines your position at the bargaining table. And so what were, you mentioned that the strike was kind of a key thing in making the union, more of an institution that was in control of its members and fought for its members. What specifically about the NALC and the other postal unions changed in the aftermath of the strike, and why did the strike invoke those changes?
So the strike, there were thousands and thousands of unnamed militants, people who maybe for the first time during the course of the strike had to step up and convince their coworkers in break rooms, in parking lots, in diners all across the country, we should take this action. And that formed the basis for a broad layer of union militants within the NALC and the other postal workers unions that cohered, that continued the fight, that eventually won, in the case of the NALC, one member, one vote, so that they could vote for their president. It propelled the Sombrado administration into power. In the case of the clerks, the unions merged into the APWU as we know it today. And they sort of cohered behind this guy, Mo Biller. And so the APWU and the NALC became very strong unions that worked in tandem all the way through up until the 1980s and 90s to not just transform the unions democratically, but also to insist that they work together, that they bargain together. They even threatened to go on strike again in 1981, I think just before the PATCO strike. So, from unions that, didn't have the right to collectively bargain, no grievance process, management in complete control within 10 years, with the catalyst being this strike and the experience that all of those people went on strike gained, the confidence, the organizing skills they learned. Within 10 years, they'd become one of the most powerful, most militant groupings of unions in the whole country. And then, unfortunately, over the years, that those traditions were gradually lost. And so, our task, I think, in studying the strike, in studying all of the moments of our history, of the broader history of the American labor movement, is to rediscover that spirit that looks to the rank and file as the engine that drives the union forward. We need leaders. We need good leaders. But if we're not making the union a force that the rank and file feel on the workroom floor, day in and day out, if our activity is not organizing them, empowering them, encouraging them to solve their problems collectively, then we will not be able to transform this union, unfortunately.
And so, bringing the conversation up to today, you have a tentative agreement from the union that many postal workers are saying that they're going to vote no on, and Build a Fighting NALC has a campaign to fight for the right to strike, and so. And there's a lot of discontent. I think that some people have been surprised by how broad the outcry from postal workers has been during this period of TA negotiations, but in particular after the release of the tentative agreement, and so. There's something of a powder keg here, and can you just remind us about the state of postal work today? What is the context that postal workers? What is the context under which postal workers received this tentative agreement that, again, many are saying is not enough?
So our contract expired back in May of 2023. It's been well over, I don't know what it is now, 500, 550 days without a contract. Since February of 2020, inflation has gone up roughly 20%. And of all the professions calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, postal workers are the ones whose pay has kept up the least relative to inflation since, I think, 2013. So already we have been facing the issue of our pay just not keeping up. There was the introduction of multiple wage tiers, the CCA position, Table 2. I won't go into too much detail, but in essence, what you create is a workforce of letter carriers who all do the same job. They all organize the mail. They all deliver the mail. They're all working under the same conditions. And yet, based on when you joined, you might be making up to $10 an hour more less than somebody who's working right next to you in the morning when you're in the office. Our compliance on the contract has been horrendous. I mean, Corey Walton emphasizes this rightly. I mean, there are just hundreds, thousands of grievance backlog case of grievances that just haven't been filed. The post office loses hundreds of millions because they just refuse to carry through the contract. The job has become much more physical. As the volume of letters has decreased, which it has. It's overemphasized, I think, in the media broadly, but the package volume has increased. So you're lifting more. It's a greater toll on the body. So people were really looking forward to this contract. Renfro, our president, emphasized that we worked through the pandemic. We got no hazard pay. We've been through this period of historically sharp increases in inflation. This was going to be a historic contract, and instead, he offered he negotiated a contract that has a 1.3% wage increase per year over 3 years. Some paltry increases here and there. Instead of higher wages, we get the right to work overtime at 2.5 times our base pay after 60 hours. None of us want to work more overtime. We want higher pay so we can work less overtime.
Right.
And all of this is exacerbating the long-term crisis of staffing. We work in postal vehicles that have been around since the 1980s. They break down all the time in the middle of the road. The electrical catches on fire. And I think right now postal workers they are fed up. And I would encourage you, if you are a postal worker right now, if you're a letter carrier, vote no on this contract. And when you get your ballot in the mail very soon, encourage everybody else to vote no. We got to vote this thing down. This is not just about pay. It's about what that pay reflects. It's about dignity. It's about our fundamental worth as human beings who work for a living. We got to tell them, no, we're not going to take this. There are risks in arbitration, but that's why we should vote no, organize contract rallies, build this sense of public pressure. That the public is behind us. They don't fully know. They're not fully aware of what we're up against. But if we can make our voices heard, I'm confident that we can win at least a better contract than this.
There's a really good More Perfect Union video that came out recently about this, that talked about some of the struggles that letter carriers are having. They talked about some letter carriers living in their cars. They talked about some union halls installing showers because they didn't, the employees, their members didn't have enough time to, take a shower at home. It was easier to do it at the union hall. And you talked about the grievance backlog. I was at the letter carriers hall here in Huntsville for a while and was talking to one of the stewards, and he showed me this huge file of grievances, and he was like, this is just, it was like this thick. It had to have been over hundreds and hundreds of grievances. And he said something like, this is just in the last 3 months or something. It was insane. I can't remember exactly how, but it was in a relatively short time span, hundreds of grievances, like just from his post office. And it's like, why violate the law? Why violate your contract that much? It just doesn't make any sense. And so what are the, to put to underscore the point, what are the things that you think letter carriers today should learn from their forefathers that went on strike in 1970? What are the lessons that if you had, there are letter carriers that are listening to this, if they take nothing else away from this conversation, everything else goes out their ears, what do you think the key should be, the key takeaway from the 1970 postal strike should be?
When we come together as letter carriers, when we organize together, when we fully embody the principle that an injury to one is an injury to all, there is no force, whether it be our national leadership, whether it be the president of the United States, who can stop us from correcting the problems in our union. A lot of letter carriers, understandably, look to the Trump administration, look to DeJoy, look to the forces that want to privatize the union. The post office, that want to turn this into a minimum wage job, and they think, oh God, they got all the power in the world. But we have not just an equal, but a greater power in each other, in organization, in movements like Build a Fighting NALC, the Concerned Letter Carriers, etc. We can take back our union, and we can, again, embody it in practice, day in and day out. If we work together to face the issues, whatever they may be in your station, in your local, I believe, at least, that there's nothing that can stop us. And we can return this union. If they were able to strike illegally, overcome 30,000 federal troops trying to break a strike, we can certainly overcome the concessionary contracts that give us. We can return this job to what it once was, a stable middle-class job to provide the kind of pay and benefits you can raise a family on. There is nothing stopping us. We just have to rediscover that fundamental tenet of the labor movement, which is that our solidarity, not just in words, not just in resolutions, but day to day, every day on the workroom floor. If we rediscover that, if we rekindle it, if we organize, if we harness that, there's nothing that can stop us.
What is the latest on the TA? You know, at one point, my understanding was that ballots were supposed to have been sent out in like mid-November, but I haven't heard anything about. I haven't even heard of people receiving their ballots yet. What's the latest on that?
So I haven't received my ballot. I haven't heard of anybody else receiving their ballot. There's a tremendous amount of activity, and I want to say thank you for providing a platform for us, Corey Walton, Tyler, myself, others, going on. People educating themselves, letter carriers, just spontaneously leafleting their stations. But currently, no details on when we're going to get our ballots. But that's kind of in line with this whole contract. I mean, we were hearing, just another week longer for, something like, 500 days now. So, but hopefully soon. And Build a Fighting NALC is going to encourage anybody, and anybody listening should, don't just vote no as an individual, vote no, and then talk to your coworkers. We've been organizing vote no photos in the parking lot, in the station, if you can do that. We want to overcome a sense of pessimism. We want people to feel like we're voting no together. Because I think there might be a lot of letter carriers who are like, geez, if I vote no, is anybody going to vote no with me? There doesn't seem to be a tradition of talking about the contract. Listen to the people who want to vote yes. Listen to their arguments. Try to organize discussions. Whether it's just before people clock in or just after work, wherever you can. And so, yeah, we're waiting for ballots to drop, but there'll be more material on the Build a Fighting NALC website. I'm sure the CLC is doing stuff. They've organized vote no resolutions in some of their locals, which is fantastic. I'd encourage that. The key thing is we want letter carriers to come together. We want to be discussing these things together. We want to break the tradition of everybody just siloed, thinking about their issues, not engaging each other. But yeah, hopefully the ballots will drop soon and we can vote this thing down.
And so, assuming, and so that's kind of bonkers. You're hoping soon, but you don't know when the ballots will be mailed out or when when they'll be counted. That's pretty wild. But assuming that a no vote happens, assuming that a majority of the NALC votes no, which I would be my assumption based on the feedback that people are giving us. What happens next?
So if this contract is voted down, it would give 15 days to negotiate a new one. There'd be a negotiation period of 15 days. If a contract was not settled in that time period, it would go to interest binding arbitration, in which there would be 3 arbitrators, one for the union, one for management, and then a neutral arbitrator that would decide the issues of the contract. And in my opinion, it would be our task to build as much pressure as possible from every possible angle to ensure that neutral arbitrator does the right thing and gives us a contract that we deserve. We don't have the right to strike. It's very unfortunate. We look at the labor movement more broadly. There are postal workers in Canada going on strike. We need that weapon. We do. It's our most powerful weapon, the ability to withhold our labor. But right now, if we organize a vote no campaign, if we get it voted down, if we put pressure on these arbitrators to do the right thing, that can translate, that can be a stepping stone towards a movement to eventually recapture that right to strike, which we're going to need for future contracts, in my opinion, but we're also going to need to defend our job if the forces of privatization decide to strike a blow. So it'll go to arbitration, and we'll just have to do everything we can, rally, organize, etc. And I think we can be successful because, that arbitrator, the neutral arbitrator, our arbitrator, we have a great case. The arbitrators themselves, there's been some misinformation about, the post office has lost money or is declaring a loss of $6 billion last year and now $9 billion this year. Are the arbitrators going to look at that and say, well, we can't give you more? In the language that set up the arbitration mechanism in the Post Reorganization Act, there is no language to guide the arbitrators to say, well, if the post office is losing money, you have to take that into the account. The only, as far as I'm aware, the language is that they have to compare the post office with comparable private industry. That is the standard that they're given, not whether the post office is. They're not in charge of balancing the post office's books. So I think we're in a strong position in arbitration, actually. But yeah, that is all to come. The first step, though, is make sure we vote this thing down.
All right. Rob Durakjian, NALC branch 2902. Appreciate your time. Coordinating committee of the Bill Defining NALC. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Likewise. Thank you, Jacob. Take care.
Yep, you too. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857 is the number if you would like to call in. We have a few more stories today before we wrap up. We mentioned that the Canadian postal workers are on strike right now, and that the Palestinian Postal Service Workers Union had expressed their solidarity with the striking Canadian postal workers. So figured that it would also be a good opportunity to give a quick update on what's going on there, since unions have been supporting increased action against Israel's assault on Gaza. Particularly, there was a vote to block offensive arms to Israel in the United States Senate, put forward by Senator Bernie Sanders and supported by several U.S. labor unions. Adam, what was the latest on that vote?
Yeah, I just wanted to pull from the UE, United Electrical, and they have been a really vocal advocate around this issue and helped form the National Labor Network for Ceasefire. So they put out a release a few days ago. Vote to block offensive arms to Israel fails, but proves that movement to end war is growing. So it was, I believe, over a week ago now that the U.S. Senate considered 3 joint resolutions of disapproval proposed by longtime UE ally Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, which would have blocked U.S. sales of offensive weaponry to the Israeli military. The resolutions, in Sanders' words, quote, are aimed at offensive weapons that have been used to devastating effect against civilians in Gaza and Lebanon. They would not affect any of the systems Israel uses to defend itself from incoming attacks. In his remarks on the floor of the Senate, Sanders told his colleagues that the resolutions are supported by some of the largest labor unions in the country, including the SEIU, the United Auto Workers, and the United Electrical Workers. He also pointed out that poll after poll shows that a strong majority of Americans oppose sending more weapons and military aid to fuel Netanyahu's war machine. Last July, UE joined 6 other unions with a combined membership of millions of workers in sending a letter to President Biden demanding that he immediately cut U.S. military aid to the Israeli government in order to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Prior to this recent vote, the National Labor Network for Ceasefire, of which UE is a founding member, mobilized unions and union members across the country to send over 600 letters to their senators demanding a yes vote on these resolutions. While the resolutions failed to pass, Sanders was joined by the other independent in the Senate, Angus King of Maine, along with 17 Democratic senators. It's about time that members of Congress begin standing up to the administration on this issue, said UE General President Carl Rosen. We welcome the support of these 19 senators, but it is a shame that the majority of the Democratic caucus, along with every single Republican senator, continues to endorse the use of U.S. weapons to slaughter civilians. Following the vote, Kevin Karazian, senior policy advisor at the advocacy organization Demand Progress, said that, quote, supporters of this destructive war will try to claim victory, but even they know that today's vote proves that the movement to end the war is growing across America and in Congress, and we won't stop. Senators from states with UE members who voted in favor of the resolutions are Senators Sanders and Welch from Vermont, Warren and Markey from Massachusetts, both senators from New Mexico, Durbin from Illinois, Helmy from New Jersey, Kane from Virginia, King from Maine, Shaheen from New Hampshire, Murphy from Connecticut, Smith from Minnesota, and Van Hollen from Maryland. So really, disappointed to see, the lack of support for Senator Sanders' resolutions. Seems to me a very reasonable ask, right? Stop giving offensive weapons to a country that is actively committing ethnic cleansing. It is the legal thing to do by international law, by American law, but so far we have seen no movement from the current administration and no indications that things will get better with the next administration. So I do applaud Senator Sanders and the UE in particular, as well as other labor unions who have been speaking out forcefully on this issue. And obviously, we're going to have to keep speaking out even louder.
Yeah, the National Labor Network for Ceasefire is made up of unions representing approximately half of U.S. union members. So that is, it's cool to see the movement on this issue and labor, kind of being at the forefront of, the anti-war movement, where that's not really, labor has not typically been there in the past, and particularly as it relates to Israel. So it's good to see this, movement, and unfortunate to see it fail. Notably, Tim Kaine from Virginia. I think Tim Kaine has really kind of been a standout among moderate Democrats on this issue. I mean, he was boycotting Netanyahu's speeches like a decade ago, which is way before, it became even remotely possible or remotely popular to do something like that. So
right, yeah, and I've got a lot of disagreements with Tim Kaine and a lot of his politics, right. But credit where credit is due. He took the right vote here, and I mean. It really is a shame that you can't garner a majority to take a stand against genocide, but that is the state of our Congress today. And I agree. I'm very proud to see labor increasingly, and a majority of labor, it seems, really standing on the right side of history.
Amazon workers, there's a lot of movement at Amazon lately.
As there should be, right?
As there should be, yeah. But I mean, really, since ALU has affiliated with the Teamsters, they have been doing really good work at Amazon. One of the latest things is that there were work stoppages at Amazon warehouses across the country. This video posted to Twitter from the Progressive International showed Amazon workers across the world engaging in work stoppages and protests and things like this. Let's play this clip of Amazon workers striking from Progressive International.
A wave of walkouts hit Amazon on this Black Friday.
Amazon workers are set to protest on Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
As Amazon workers at multiple locations walked off the job today,
protesting the company's work practices. Organizers say the strikes and the protests are part of a campaign called Make Amazon Pay.
Say that demonstrations were planned across 30 countries,
including France, Germany, the US,
and in Japan, Brazil.
The biggest disruption in the company's 30-year history.
Moltissimi lavoratori di Amazon stanno scioperando.
Centenares de trabajadores de Amazon en todo el mundo se fueron a la huelga.
En France, l'association ATTAC dénonce une journée de surproduction et de la surconsommation.
An mehreren deutschen Standorten des Onlinehändlers Amazon haben Mitarbeiter ihre Arbeit niedergelegt.
Así que, como decimos, afectaría a toda la cadena de suministro.
The group is demanding that the company increase wages, pay more taxes, and reduce the company's carbon footprint.
So really cool, 30 countries, largest work stoppage in Amazon's 30-year history. Really cool stuff. Here in the South, workers in Atlanta announced they were unionizing with a March on the Boss. Here's a clip of the March on the Boss.
I am living history. I am the movements of generations before me. I am the future that they did not see. I am the one who...
Teamsters! Who are we? Teamsters! Who are we? Teamsters! Who are we? Teamsters! Now, don't walk away now. Who are we? Teamsters! Who are
when he was saying don't walk away now, that was the management was walking away into their office trying to hide from the March on the Boss. So that was pretty cool. And here is the this is the clip that we initially played first, where they were making the announcement and talking about why they were unionizing, why they are unionizing with the Teamsters.
I am living history. I am the movements of generations before me. I am the future that they did not see. I am the one who now paves the way for all those who come after me. I am living history.
The movement here in Atlanta is extremely strong.
It's because of the city's history.
This is the mecca for a lot of things.
And civil rights.
We have the history of doing this already.
We got a different fire to this.
It's in our bones.
South has been battling for these types of things.
I need something that's beneficial and something that can stick to make sure that my family is good and I don't have to work check to check.
It's about to be my baby boy's first Christmas. I don't even know if I can get him presents.
I'm trying to provide for this one and another little one off of $21 an hour.
We're probably paid the least. FedEx, UPS.
I'm excited to be a Teamster, man. It's brotherhood, family bound.
I love being a Teamster because it gives me a voice.
I'm excited to join us Teamsters because they welcome me with open arms.
I'm excited with everything with Teamsters. I'm with the family.
It makes me feel empowered.
Forever, I'm a Teamster.
In a press release that accompanied the video, Trent Knight, an Amazon Teamster at DGT8, where those workers were, said, Amazon workers deserve so much more from a company that makes billions of dollars in profits every year. Many of us can barely afford to pay our bills and make rent each month, yet we're the reason Amazon is one of the most profitable companies in the world. With this union, we're taking a step to finally get the pay, benefits, and respect we deserve. Aaron Nipper, another Amazon Teamster at DGT8, said, Amazon cannot continue to get away with paying us poverty wages while they earn more in profits year after year. We're tired of the disrespect and not being able to afford basic living expenses to keep a roof over our head and feed our families. Enough is enough. We're proud to join the Amazon Teamsters, and we're going to fight for what we deserve. They also list the Teamsters do the organizing wave unfolding in Amazon across the country. Since September, warehouse workers in San Francisco, delivery drivers in Queens, Victorville, and City of Industry have all formed unions with the Teamsters and demanded recognition. Meanwhile, workers at the company's largest air hubs in Kentucky and California have walked off the job in protest of the company's unfair labor practices. In June, Amazon labor union members at JFK 8 in Staten Island voted to affiliate with the Teamsters by a near unanimous 98.3% in favor. The growing momentum is inspiring more Amazon workers to join the thousands already part of the union. Talking about some of the problems at Amazon, the Teamsters say Amazon wields absolute control over the terms and conditions of employment for its delivery drivers through its delivery service partner program. Yet the company has argued that it does not employ the workers. In August, Amazon drivers in Palmdale, California secured a monumental victory when National Labor Relations Board Region 31 made a determination that Amazon is a joint employer of its drivers and therefore has a legal duty to recognize and bargain with the Teamsters. The joint employer determination sets a major precedent and is applicable to Amazon drivers who work under similar conditions nationwide, including the Amazon DGT8 drivers. This is no longer the Teamsters speaking. I don't think they would want to be so forward with this. But this ruling is obviously going to be in jeopardy, potentially, from a Trump NLRB. And so we'll see how much leverage Sean O'Brien's kind of, flirting with Donald Trump is able to give him. Donald Trump did appoint a relatively pro-labor secretary, or did nominate a relatively pro-labor person to be Secretary of Labor, but that position has, doesn't have just a whole lot of power over employers. There's a lot of really important things that a Secretary of Labor can do, but some Trump advisors are already going around because there was a lot of business people freaking out about it. I mean, it was really kind of cool to see some Chamber of Commerce types talking about how concerned they are about, is Trump actually serious about being pro-worker? And a lot of Trump advisors have been going around and talking to these business folks saying, don't worry. It's not a big deal. You'll be a lot more, you will be more, less worried once you see who we're going to pick for deputy secretary and who you see that we appoint for the NLRB. So, these are going to be, the NLRB in particular is going to be a really big test of how serious Donald Trump is about maintaining the, the relatively small amount of support that he has from union leadership, particularly the Teamsters. If I was Sean O'Brien, the NLRB would be the one that I would be going to the mat on rather than Labor Secretary, because the NLRB has the power to, to declare that Amazon contractors are jointly employed by Amazon. And so Amazon also has to negotiate with the Teamsters when these folks unionize with the Teamsters. So really important precedent that the Teamsters mentioned that is potentially put at risk by the Trump victory. But we'll see. Look, I mean, like I said, I don't know if I haven't been on the air since Trump made that nomination, but I did talk to Dale about it last week, Dale Jackson, the conservative radio host in Huntsville. And, I said, look, like it's a good pick. It's a good pick as far as these things go. And we will see how much that means. How much does it mean that Donald Trump picked a relatively pro-labor secretary? And her pro-labor bona fides are a lot, frankly, to be determined. She was in Congress for one term, under a Democratic president. And so she did support the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act and the PRO Act, which are very important and very controversial for a Republican to support, but also she supported them at a time when there was zero chance of them passing. So pro-labor, her pro-labor bona fides are for sure to be determined. But, as far as these things go, it's about as good as you could hope for from a Trump pick. But we'll see how what his NLRB picks look like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it really hinges on the NLRB more than the DOL. And I think it's easy to throw us a bone on that, personally. I'm not going to put too much into it one way or the other, really. I think we're going to have to wait and see. But, as you mentioned, there are some things that the Secretary of Labor can do, and it's going to be up to Labor to pressure her to try to be a vocal advocate for labor. But really, yeah, I'm waiting to see what's the rest of the administration look like. What's the rest of the makeup when it comes to labor specifically? How's that really going to shake out? I think it's pretty easy to throw us a bone on the secretary appointment, and then throw the Chamber of Commerce a lot of bones.
Yeah,
I think that's very possible. So not saying that's what's going to happen, but seems likely.
Yeah. We'll see. Another Amazon Teamster news. Another Amazon Teamster news. This one out of New York, where Amazon suspended a Queens driver that was assaulted by the corporation's own union buster. This is a crazy story. Amazon Teamsters marched on the boss in New York City on Wednesday after a corporate union buster hired by the trillion-dollar company verbally assaulted and repeatedly used a homophobic slur against an Amazon driver as he arrived for work. Observed by multiple witnesses, including Amazon management, union buster Juan Carlos Cervantes of Government Resources Consultants of America attacked the Amazon employee during the morning of November 26 at the company's DBK4 facility in Queens. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters are filing an unfair labor practice charges against Amazon over the assault, as well as formal complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. During the incident, Cervantes verbally threatened the Amazon delivery driver with physical violence at work before loudly calling the Teamster a homophobic slur multiple times as he prepared for work. The driver was able to begin making deliveries as work got underway on Tuesday, but was notified by Amazon management later in the day that the e-commerce giant was suspending him pending an investigation into the attack. Emmanuel T., the assaulted Amazon driver, said, Amazon hired this union buster to come harass me at work and call me a homophobic slur. Amazon is creating an unsafe workplace for me and my coworkers, especially my fellow Teamsters who identify as LGBTQ. We don't need harassment and homophobia. What we need is for Amazon to follow the law and negotiate a Teamsters union contract that provides the pay and safety we deserve. Amazon drivers at DBK4 overwhelmingly organized with the Teamsters on September 16th. In the months since, Amazon has refused to recognize the union, leading to the filing of numerous ULP charges against the company for worker retaliation, union busting, and blatant labor law violations. Amazon is legally obligated to bargain a first contract with the Teamsters drivers under federal law, though Amazon continues to break said law. Following the workers' suspension, Amazon drivers marched on the boss at DBK4 earlier last week to demand his reinstatement and for the immediate removal of Cervantes and other union busters that Amazon has brought into the facility. As of Wednesday afternoon, Amazon told the Teamsters Union the worker remains suspended but would not respond about the union buster. That is just insane. Really, really wild stuff. Here's some stats from the Teamsters. Between 2022 and 2023 alone, Amazon spent more than $17 million hiring corporate union busters to swarm its delivery stations, warehouses, and fulfillment centers to try to intimidate or threaten workers from joining the Teamsters. Cervantes was paid $75,000 during a previous anti-union campaign, according to union busting watchdog group Labor Lab. Despite the abuse or explicit attacks such predators wage against working people, thousands of Amazon workers nationwide continue to join the movement to unionize. Amazon workers at 5 facilities nationwide have all united to join the Teamsters in recent months, including workers at Amazon's DGT8 facility in Atlanta earlier this week. Since September, warehouse workers in San Francisco and Amazon drivers in New York and Southern California have all organized and demanded Amazon recognize the Teamsters. So, lots of news coming out of Amazon recently with the Teamsters at the head of all of it, and looking forward to continuing to see news coming out of Amazon.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest employers. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most strategic employers, so it's really important, and glad to see the momentum the Teamsters seem to have. Hopefully it keeps going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially seeing it in the South. Love to see Atlanta on the map, and yeah, good job, Teamsters comms department, on putting that video together.
Yeah.
That's good.
Taking a cue from the UAW.
I would say so.
So as we're rounding out, we have one more segment, but I imagine we'll probably save it for next week. I think we have some, we'll spend a little bit of time on that. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857 is the number to call in. You can also leave us a voicemail throughout the week if you're not listening to us live, or if you're not able to get to a phone right now. You can leave us a voicemail. Kind of surprised that Mark in the chat has not called in. He's been very animated. One might call him emotional in our chat. And in particular, you know, he's been saying he's the one that said we should vote yes on the TA, but also Vincent Sombrado, who led an illegal Wildcat strike, was the best president in the NALC's history. I would love to have him call in and explain that, kind of holding those two things in your head for me. And in particular, one of the things he was not happy about was that we didn't bring up the territorial cost of living adjustments in the interview with Rob, and the territorial cost of living adjustments, and it just didn't seem like that was a super important, it doesn't change the dynamics of the conversation that you don't have territorial cost of living adjustments across the NALC. That doesn't seem to me like, something that would change the dynamics of the conversation. But, of course, if he wants to make that case, then he can call in. Also, not mentioning the COLA. The COLA, again, doesn't really change the dynamics of the conversation. Again, I think if you add the COLA to the 1.3% raise, you get something less than 2%. So still, not keeping up with inflation, it seems to me, or the $1,000 to top pay. And the $1,000 to top pay affects very, very few people. And so, it just doesn't seem like, it seems strange that he's constantly, bringing these things up that do not seem to me to change the dynamics of the broader conversation. But nevertheless, Appreciate him spending time in the chat this morning. Also appreciate everybody else listening. We have some 70, 80 people watching, only 45 likes, so let's get the likes up. If you haven't liked the stream, then go ahead and do that. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. Appreciate folks that are watching us on Facebook. As always, Mel and Joe in the Facebook. Appreciate it. Really appreciate everybody that's been tuning in. Adam, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to leave folks with before we wrap up today?
I've got a few plugs.
Yeah.
I did want to shout out Labor Notes, as I often do, because they have some good trainings coming up in a couple weeks. You can go to labornotes.org/events. They have, well, this seems really relevant and timely to some of the conversations our letter carrier brothers and sisters have been having. On December 10th at 6:30 Central Time, Labor Notes has What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart. And I feel like there might be some letter carriers, among others, interested in that workshop. Again, that's December 10th, 6:30 Central. You can do that online. They also have a stewards workshop coming up on December 12th, Thinking Like an Organizer. It's going to be at 5 p.m. Central. This workshop is intended for stewards and elected officers who work closely with stewards. If that describes you and you want to check that out, it's December 12th, 5 o'clock Central Time. Recommend you do that. Thinking Like an Organizer is a great training for shop stewards and for officers. So I wanted to lift those up. I'm trying to think what else we got going on. If you are local, if you are in North Alabama, do know that the North Alabama Area Labor Council will be holding its business meeting on, December 10th?
Yep.
So that's coming up pretty soon. On December 12th, that evening, I will be holding a virtual meeting with Alabama Arise, doing a legislative preview. So if you want to find out, some of the threats and opportunities ahead in the 2025 legislative session, what we're doing to organize around that, you can tune in. That should be up on alarise.org, but we'll have all the details out there in the coming days. That's really all I had for plugs, I believe. Next week, we've got some interesting stuff coming up on the show. I do know at some point we'll probably talk about politics a little bit in the Alabama context. We've had lots of conversations. Lots of people are asking questions and have thoughts and concerns and ideas about where we move forward in Alabama specifically, but in the South more broadly, because a lot of the national political conversations don't always perfectly translate down here. And I'll just give you an example. When I went to go vote recently, 15 of 17 offices were unopposed Republicans, right? So that's a dynamic that we're wrestling with here, and I know that's not the case everywhere, but it's definitely something we are dealing with. I know Bernie Sanders just had an interview in The Nation magazine where he kind of expanded a little bit on his post-election message, and he's encouraging folks to run as working class candidates and advance working class politics, whether that be inside the Democratic Party or outside of the Democratic Party as an independent. And in this interview, they talked about Dan Osborne, who was on the Valley Labor Report just a couple weeks ago, who ran an independent working class kind of campaign in Nebraska for Senate, came really, really close, definitely bucked some national trends. So we'll be talking more about that in the coming days or coming weeks, future episodes. Curious to know what other people think about what we should do moving forward. And encourage folks to leave voicemails. Would love to know if politics or labor unions came up at your Thanksgiving dinner. It's always interesting when those things happen. So if you want to give us a call or leave us a voicemail throughout the week, we'd love to know about your experiences. And if you have bad boss stories, good organizing victories, anything you want to share with us, please do give us a call. And I think we actually do have a caller on the line before we wrap up
Yeah, we
today.
do. You called like literally 2 minutes after we normally wrap the show, but we'll go ahead and take the call from a 317 area code. Got to be quick. 317 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm going to go by Jimmy because I don't want to give my name away, but I'm from Indianapolis.
Sure. Jimmy from Indianapolis. Yeah, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Rob did a great job representing us well, talking about the 1970s strike. Like him, I'm only 3 years in. But big thing that he missed, he didn't know, I don't think. But we're supposed to be getting those ballots on December 1st. It goes west first, and then it'll slowly trickle to the east as the next coming weeks come by. The reason for that, they said, was due to holiday work, peak season, and the political atmosphere when we originally got. That was the reason. Total crap if you ask me. But, they're just trying to, like everything else, bide their time. Hopefully people become disinterested is what I think they're hoping for. I've had a lot of conversations with my postal workers in my own office, trying to get them informed, telling them why I'm a vote no, easily, hands down, no contest, for all kinds of reasons. Too many to list in this short conversation, but definitely vote no. I encourage everybody. There's definitely some pushback, some apathy that I've seen. I just hope that we can hold together like Rob said in the 1970s and get us going strong here in the last, hour of this voting. So next week we should be getting those ballots. Start looking for them. Make sure you fill them out correctly. Don't write on them too much. Fill them out right. Sign them. And I'd say get them certified. So get them certified postage. Take them in.
Right.
All right, that's me.
Well, if you have a second to answer a question, you mentioned there was some apathy in your office. I'm interested in what that looks like. Apathy, and maybe it sounds like some people are voting yes. What do you, if you had to guesstimate, the temperature of your office? Do you think it leans yes or leans no, and why?
I think it's hard to say. It's not like I've taken a full consistent, a lot of people don't want to talk about it. A lot of people are angry, certainly, than the younger demographic, for sure. The older crowd seems a little less, I saw a comment saying the people in the Midwest don't really care because they're not the ones suffering. And that's certainly a factor. I'm not going to lie. I've seen that accurately pushed. Why should I care about some CCA? We don't have CCA here. But why should I care? And I'm like, because they're our brothers and sisters. Like, come on. That's ridiculous. But I think a lot of the younger demographic leans no. And I would say some of the older who have been around for over 30 years, who were part of, or were represented in those strikes from the Wildcat strike, who were trained by people who were part of that, who saw what the union was like back in the day, and how hard we had to work and fight for that. But there's just the general people who are at the top steps. They just don't really. They fear arbitration. That's a huge thing. And I've said, I don't operate under fear. I'm a fight 100% of the time. I'm not going to let somebody tell me what we can and can't get. We don't know. If we lose, we lose. But there's nothing wrong with fighting. Nothing wrong with fighting. So I'd say, again, it's about in the younger demographics, about 80 or 90-10. 90% to 10% no. 90 no. In the older demographic, it's about I'd say about 70-30. I'm not real sure, but I just see there's like, people who just don't see it as big of a deal, and but for us who at step C and in between, it is a big deal. It's like, well, we're not getting anything at all. So,
right.
I don't know why you would say yes. Well, when I tell them that we're mandatory times go up to 11.5, that's a 12-hour day with the lunch. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to be mandated up to that. If you're on the 8-hour list and you're getting mandated for 12s, what's the point? Why have a 1260 agreement? Well, it's ridiculous. And I've made these points, but some people, it's not, and I don't want to try and convince anybody, I don't want to try and force my views on people. But this is your life too, and you got to think about the people who come after you and the people who are suffering now. Brother and sisters, they're carriers to carriers.
Right.
It doesn't matter if CCA or whatever. We were all working the same job. We're all doing the same thing.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I've taken up way too much of your time.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for the call.
Well, no problem. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. The guy responded in the chat saying the CCAs are our brothers and sisters, but the carriers who live in California, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are not. Is that what I just heard? No, that's not what you just heard, Mark. You're being silly. You don't actually believe that he said that. What he was saying was, trying to find, common ground with you and trying to engage in this conversation in a comradely way. Saying that the dynamic, Mark, that you are identifying of people looking out for themselves and not caring enough about people in situations different from them is a dynamic that the caller said he recognized. And as an illustration of the recognition of this dynamic, he talked about how some people don't care about the provisions for CCAs because there are no CCAs in their post office. So why should I care? And he's saying that the CCAs are brothers and sisters. You should care for them because they're also letter carriers. Yeah, would appreciate good faith engagement. If you're going to engage, even if you're going to do it antagonistically, you should at least be good faith and not purposely misconstrue. I mean, you don't believe that he said that. I don't believe that you believe that he said that. So let's operate better than that. Folks, you can give us a call, 844-899-TVLR, and leave us a voicemail, and we will respond to it on the next program. I know that a lot of letter carriers, listen on their route, and they don't want to call in while they're working, so you can leave us a voicemail if you don't feel comfortable calling while we're live. 844-899-TVLR is the same number. Leave us a voicemail anytime. Other than that, folks, appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next week. With the New York Times or something?